back to the Awakening Philosophy podcast. My name is Jed, and this is a channel and a podcast where we learn philosophy. We are trying to discover what exactly philosophy is and how do we do it and why we should care so much about philosophy. And we are reading Plato's Phaedo to see what Socrates says philosophy is, which has been a lot of fun. Last time we had a lot of fun looking at how we can apply what we've learned about philosophy to understand problems in our everyday world, from the most important global problems, the nature of the political systems that we are sharing in, to the more mundane, the nature of meme debates that we share in, like the one about would you rather be trapped in a forest with a man or a bear if you're a woman, which is popular now and will probably be forgotten about in a week. Nevertheless, we were able to have some fun applying what we've been learning about philosophy to understand those, to make sense of them, because that's the nature of the Logos. The Logos is our ticket into philosophy. It's what we're learning as we go. And of course, it has the way that it demonstrates itself, or the way that the Logos functions, or the way that we can share in it, is through the dialectic. So, understanding issues of interest and problems of note and solving them using the Logos and the dialectic. But of course, the most important problem that we want to solve is the problem of our own souls. The puzzle of what is life about and what is death about and what should we be doing while we're here. Socrates laid it all out for us in the Phaedo. Of course, it took some work for us to understand, but that's part of the game. It's an active quest that we're on. We are sharing in it by functioning ourselves, by sharing ourselves, sharing our highest understanding and vision and open, wondering states of mind. So we can, I'm really tempted to say participate, but we're not taking a part of the Logos. That's a different kind of language for a different level of reality. The bear reality, we could call it, the left and right movement of parts in the world of becoming, taking a part of something for yourself, fighting with others to take the parts that you want. Socrates pointing out this is what naturally follows in the dialectic of if you don't have philosophy. People will end up instead loving the body, and that means loving honor, fame, or riches, and that's the cause of all wars and conflict that we face. So, written in black and white, and we're able to understand it so long as we share our minds and ourselves with the Logos too. So, from bears to governments to the soul. If this is the doctrine that Socrates has been sharing with us, philosophy is the art and practice of death and dying, that only would make sense if our soul is immortal. If there is some learning that we're here to do that can last beyond this lifetime, which would make this a rational reality. We're not here to suffer just for the sake of it. Then again, that would require there to be an immortal soul. But we don't necessarily get taught that at school. Fortunately, one of the people there with Socrates at the end of his life asked him the question, hey, can you give us the argument as to why our soul must be immortal? Can you convince me? And so we've been going through that. What are the arguments that show that necessarily the soul must be immortal? Number one. Number two, what is the way in which you would communicate that to somebody? How do you use the dialectic to communicate that most important question? Or to somebody else or to yourself? If you're a philosopher yourself and you have a friend and they ask the question, hey, I really want to understand what I'm here for, and the most important thing would be understanding the nature of my own soul, whether or not it's immortal, or if this physical world is all that there is. How would you go about communicating what you have learnt through your Logos and knowledge to them? So, listening to the arguments and seeing if we can be convinced, number one. Learning whether or not our soul is immortal. Number two, learning how we would communicate it. How do we use the dialectic? And number three, what should we use to judge? If we have the arguments and we have the structure of the arguments, what then? How do we judge whether the arguments should change our mind? We recognize, of course, having your mind changed about that which is most fundamental to our lives can be difficult. Going to school and learning about biology, less difficult, right? You accept that you want to change your mind at school. You pay money to do that in most places, unfortunately. Unfortunately, education is not free, which is another byproduct of not having philosophy in the world. People wanting to gather riches for themselves at the expense of the development of the society as a whole, but that's another topic. So it's easy to change your mind about something you are learning about in school. But what about the things that you learnt through imitating your most beloved parents when you were very, very young and dependent upon them as a necessary stage of your survival? In other words, very few families act as though the soul is immortal, talk about the nature of the soul, talk about the nature of the afterlife in a non-religious sense, in an understanding sense. Talk about experiencing it for yourself. Learn the logos and the dialectic to present those arguments, and very few families live that way, as though the soul is immortal. And we know that because most people fear death most of all. Whereas Socrates says if you're doing your life's work properly, you won't. You will in fact desire death, and you will have practiced death and dying. And philosophers, more than anybody, deserve it. And of course, his friends laughed at him because a lot of people don't realize that and don't like hearing that because it goes against their teaching. And they say, people say philosophers are the ones that deserve death, definitely. And Socrates says, oh yeah, they're right, but they don't know why they're right. So, something that's fundamental to how you live and how your family lives and how your culture lives and how your religion makes sense of the world, these are things that can be harder for us to change our minds about. They're more fundamental. Metaphysically, they're more primary. Like how you run your business presumes more primarily that you should start a business. And that assumes primarily that you should spend your life making money. And that presumes primarily that your reason for being is to move up the corporate ladder, for example. And that presumes that there is no soul maybe after this physical life. So, work your hardest in this world for what you can achieve in this world. As an example. So what is more primary or causal has more scope. That's a metaphysical term, has more scope. And therefore, more things hinge on it. Including, this is why it makes it difficult, our beloved images of our beloved family members or early teachers. If this primary idea is wrong, that means these people who we've always believed to be good and wise and true, and we'd fight for them if you ever criticized my family or my religion or my parents. I'd go to war and kill you if you... Right? That's how strong the human allegiance is to our image of our early teachers. But if what they took for granted is wrong, that means they were dumb. They were wrong. They were ignorant. They were fiercely holding on to something that was fundamentally wrong. They were not virtuous. They were full of vice. And when I say dumb, I don't mean unaware, because that would be the left to right movement from realizing you have to learn something and then learning it. Asleep to awake. Enrolling at college, graduating from college. So this vice isn't the left and right movement in the world of becoming. It's the greater less kind of relationship that happens if we are humans with a mind. So it's believing you know something fundamentally that is incorrect. That's the kind of lesser greater ignorance that we talked about last time. Which is why people would rather a bear who can move from left to right than a man who can have the shadow of knowledge, which is pathologos, ignorance, to be strongly convinced in what is unjust, being just. And all of the things that follow, the way your parents lived, the way your society lived, the way your best friend lived, all fall into confusion. You need a new way of making sense of everything. Therefore, this particular argument that's one of the most primary, metaphysically causal, with the greater scope, can be the most difficult to change our mind about. We feel a greater allegiance to it. Of course, this brings in the insult of dog. Why is dog an insult? Because, dogs are amazing, but they are loyal to whoever they grew up with. So they're loyal to a fold. That's what the insult dog means. And you don't want to be loyal to a Hitler. You don't want to be loyal to injustice. That's tyranny. So when we go through this arguments, we are aware that we will have counterattacks in our inner voice, the inner critic, which we can recognize as the pathologos, false belief trying to save itself, the anti-logos, because we are learning the true logos. The pathologos can't survive the light of the true logos, the self-logos. And good, because we want to purify ourselves from what is ignorant in the philosophical quest to know what is true. But also, not only will there be the understanding, the voice, the logos, the anti-logos, but there'll be a state of mind. This is the fundamental two-part system of philosophy. We develop understanding and knowledge, thinking and state of mind. So we'll have a thinking that counterattacks it and a state of mind. We will not like it. It will feel uncomfortable. And what is comfortable, familiar, these are the sorts of feelings that are tied to our certainty, what we're certain of. Incorrectly certain of course. Certainty being the shadow of knowing. We call it Dunning-Kruger effect. The more ignorant people tend to be, the more certain they are in their ignorance. So this will feel uncomfortable. It will feel unfamiliar. We'll have a desire to return back to what we know, the old masks, the old way of thinking. As we go through this. Why? Because that's the human quest. That's why it's a hero's journey. It ain't easy sometimes, but it's doable. That's what we're here for, says Socrates. So, if that's the case, we can't use what we feel is true, or what our inner critic or the voice of our parents or ancestors from that pathologos lineage are telling us is true. We can't use that as a criteria. So our third question that we're having is, what is our criteria for what is true? What makes something true? And therefore, what is the criteria upon which we should change our mind? So those are the three big ones we're carrying into this text today. What is the nature of the soul? Following the arguments themselves. What is the structure of the arguments? Learning the dialectic and how to use it. But also, what is the metric or the standard upon which we should use to change our mind? Upon which we should change, what that we should use to change our mind. What makes something true? Of course, we say, well, we've been talking a lot about truth is the realm of being. That's what is true, and you know it directly. Yes, but to get there, we've been talking about dianoia. Dianoia is that through which we perfect ourselves, the kind of understanding that uses the self-logos and the dialectic directed towards being. That's the way, that's the path. So if we use that to change our mind, to purify ourselves from our ignorance and prepare ourselves from the mystical vision, for the mystical vision, then, and by the way, it's an if, you don't know it until you confirm it, of course. Then what is the criteria to make an if true as it can be? And we've been talking about the virtues. Not only do we want to reach there through understanding, reach knowledge through understanding, nous, noesis, but Socrates points that, hey, you also have to be developing the virtues. And as we do with everything in philosophy, know the true thing and know the false thing. Know the real thing and know its shadow. Just like philosophy has its shadow, which we call the sophists, people who claim to be knowers, claim to use philosophy, but are just doing the opposite. Don't include the self-logos and dialectic. Don't do dianoia. Don't direct it towards being and truth. And don't even recognize that those aspects of being are of the self. So instead, they are interested in the world of becoming, the physical world, opinion. And they claim to, and we see a lot of them on YouTube and however you get your media today, Rumble, talking about claiming to be a philosopher, but they do the opposite. They do the shadow. So Socrates, or Plato and Socrates, talk about it in the Republic in book 6, I think. People who realize there's a gap in the market. There aren't a lot of true philosophers wandering around out there, which we have to change, of course, which is one of the purposes of this podcast. But as such, some people like fill the void and claim to be philosophers because they like the idea of acting like a knower. It's the appeal of the pathologos. You get to be a knower and you get to be a tyrant. You don't have to change your mind. You don't have to do any work. Professional opinion havers. So many people would love to be a professional opinion haver. So sophist is the name in philosophy. Sophist. The shadow of philosophy. We talked about the shadow of philosophy involving a love of learning, a love of wisdom, and a love of the special upgraded kind of virtue called phronesis, making wisdom your own in a special kind of way. A way that is can go beyond this lifetime because it doesn't lose its power. What a fascinating idea to wonder about. Socrates has been talking about how that has its shadow too. A love of the body, a love of honor, and a love of riches. And that's what we see these, sophist podcasts claiming to be philosophers, embodying that. But hopefully we will learn why that has to be the case, and we are learning that, and we're learning the dialectic on how to communicate what they need to learn to change their mind, and we'll also learn what is the standard by which we should change our mind, so we don't fall into that trap. And hey, if one of them becomes open for whatever reason, and they're willing to give up their fame and riches to find the truth, then we will have a way of talking to them that can benefit them, so we can use our learning to benefit. But of course, primarily we want to benefit ourselves. That back and forth, that kind of conversation also happens within our soul. We have our internal sophist telling us the anti-logos that we inherit from our family, our culture, our religion, and our ancestry. And our human evolution, of course, that's the most causal. It goes back to caveman times. But also we have the inner voice of the self-logos, which may be called the daemon, Socrates' special inner guide, that we all have, but speaks in a quieter voice. So we have to do what we can to address most fairly and justly in a way that purifies that negative voice, and listen most carefully for that positive voice, the self-logos voice that we have. So, sound like fun? Let's jump into the text and see if we can see those three things. What are they? What is the soul? Is it immortal? Because you have a soul, I have a soul. Is it immortal? That's very important to figure out. Number 2, how does Socrates help us learn whether or not it's immortal? What's the structure through which he communicates? Because that's what we want to learn too, to do it to ourselves and to others. And finally, after hearing the arguments and the structure, what is our metric for changing our mind? That big question, what makes something true? So if somebody comes to you, who are you to say that that is philosophy? Who are you to say what's right and wrong? Who are you to say what's true? First of all, we recognize that's a anti-logos question, narrative. It's a question of who, which is about what tribe are you in? Is it my cave or your cave? Because early human thinking, my cave good, other caves bad. So therefore, stay loyal to your cave so you don't get eaten by saber-toothed tigers. We call that in-group, out-group. Everyone in my group is good. Everyone in the outside group is bad. So we find names to vilify them. Woke is just a way of saying everything that's not my right-wing group. And it's ridiculous because clearly there's no actual definition. And the reason is they don't realize that it's the functioning of the anti-dialectic from caveman times. Famously, right-wingers when called, hey, by the way, you keep talking about anti-woke culture or woke culture. What is woke? They can't give you a definition because there isn't any. Well, there is. The definition is anyone outside my cave, anyone not in my group, anyone who disagrees with my fundamental pathologos. You can't say that, so they try and change the subject, destroy the logos of the question. But any war, the enemy are heathens, they're evil, they're vermin. Other group bad, immigrants are bad. Women are bad. Often these grifters appeal to men specifically by saying, oh, the other group are bad. Sexism. Right, all just a byproduct of the way of thinking from the pathologos. So we can recognize that in the question, who's to say what's true? That's a who question. That's a person question. A particular individual is a who. So you're asking what cave are they in? And you can see this. I love, even though philosophy needs to be awakened, and for most people in the world it's yet to be awakened, we only have the new texts with the accurate translations only recently. We only have had the internet for a very short amount of time, but we've had institutions pumping out academics for a very long time in the tradition of the counterattack to Socrates, the Latin tradition, the next Reich, as the church called it, which is an interesting story, but for another day. So therefore, there are a lot of people who are otherwise quite smart, but have been brought up in that culture that is anti-logos. There is no realm of being. It's just logic. It's just physical. It's just materialism. It's just reductionism. Those sorts of things. So even though that's the conditions that they grew up in, they're still, a lot of them are still open. Some of them are open-minded and curious and think in a structured way, which is still really nice to listen to. So I'm a fan of some of them, while, recognizing the period of history in which they grew up and the fact that they might not be doing the logos and true philosophy as Socrates is putting it. Otherwise, they can be nice to listen to. Without the logos, without this third question, upon what should we change our mind, I've noticed that one of the standards they do use is, of course, a who question, but point to an old authority figure. Can you make it so that Abraham said it? Can you make it such that our founding fathers said it? Or another one is, can you find you win an argument? can you win the argument because you can find the most people who said it. So a lot of religious people will say, oh no, if I can make it so Abraham said it, if I can make it so Muhammad said it, if I can make it so Jesus said it, then it makes it true. The founding fathers said it. Another argument is, well, I can find lots of different people saying it. If I can find a way to make Jesus say it, and Buddha say it, and Krishna say it, and the founding fathers say it, then that proves my argument right. It's very interesting. It's very fun. I love listening to that. And that's the way you're reasoning. That's curious. Because I'm curious. Like, without the logos, what's your metric for truth? What's your paradigm? What's your standard to win an argument? I recognize that you're not doing dialectic. I never see the dialectic online on any of these shows or podcasts. But that's okay. We're just learning it now. We're introducing it. We're awakening it. It's not a criticism or an attack. It's just the way it is. But we can have fun learning it and sharing it. And the more people who learn it, hey, encourage them. Don't make them feel bad because they weren't born knowing everything. So it's not a criticism. But in the absence of the dialectic, in an absence of whatever the standard that we're going to find out is, what are you using as a standard? Because you talk a lot. And that's a good thing. I like it. But there's a lot of these shows. Some people have many videos. And what's your standard? So that's a fun question I take with me into these questions. Without the dialectic, they're usually debating. Or they're being polite debaters. They're very, I think there's some recognition for a lot of them that it's rude to actually debate, but we are debating. I have a lot of respect for my opponent, which can be bad in a sense because they can't make a definitive decision. Well, I'm not going to speak out against that person because that's kind of mean, but I'm going to give the opposing argument, which is speaking out against them, but I'm not going to say it directly because I don't want to get into a fight or I don't want to lose my job or whatever. So they're debating, not dialectic. That's easy. That's fun to see. But also, and then who wins? Who wins? Who wins the debate? What makes something true if you don't have the logos? So that's a fun question I take in with these videos, isn't it? And if I get more people interested, we can look through, we can have a watch along with one of those videos or some of those videos. We can make it a regular thing if I get if people want to see that, people want to share in that, people are interested in that sort of thing. It can be a lot of fun. I know other streamers, and other YouTubers and other content creators or do that, watch alongs or commentaries. So we're kind of doing the anagogic version, applying it to philosophy. So that can be fun. So, when someone asks us the big question, especially when we're doing philosophy and we're interested in what? Truth and phronesis. Don't know what that one is, so let's just look at truth. People will often, one of the standard arguments or just genuine questions sometimes is, who's to say what's right or wrong? Or who are you to say that that's true? And we can say, well, it's Socrates, so it's the big dog. Of course, that's not the correct answer. That's the bad answer because Socrates didn't make this true. He's just sharing the logos the way his teacher did, and Parmenides, and we're having fun seeing what Parmenides said at the start of Socrates' life and what Socrates is saying at the end. It's universal. But also we recognize that the who question is in the anti-logos tradition. It's not about who. That's still the realm of opinion. That's the realm of humans. That's the bears. It's not who. Because what would make them right? It's a what question. What makes something true? And that's our question coming into this talk today. Whether or not the soul is immortal, by listening to the arguments, what is the method through which it's communicated? Or 3 whats. What is the nature of the soul relative to its immortality? What is the way of communicating that? And what makes it true? So, that's the 3 big questions we're going to take in with us. And that's a fun way of reading. To have a question when you enter the text. Last time we talked about how the anagogic triad, the triad of our journey back home to reach our destiny, is represented by Plato and Proclus, who wrote books about Plato's work. By the triad of Hermes, which represents a dialectic. That's where we're heading. Good. We're on the right track. But the two lesser parts of that triad, Apollo and Aphrodite. Apollo, philosophy, the true music. So we need to have our nose in the text down here. And Aphrodite, the love, the motivational cause that we get when we apply it to our lives. So we gotta not just read it like a dead text, like we're robots, like we're an AI chatbot. We have to also bring in our own questions. Bringing in our own questions is a fun way to make it human. To bring in the Aphrodite element. Why are you reading it? How do you apply it to your life? What makes it more fun? What makes it more inspiring? So a good way of doing that is to bring in questions with you as you read. Carry them. And so those are 3 ones that I'm throwing out for today, which is the Aphrodite part, and then we're going to get into the text, which is the Apollo, and we're going to read the rhythm, and we're going to look for the rhythm and the harmony in the text of the logos. So we're learning the logos, but also we've got our questions, which makes it real to us and can trigger insights, and those insights are nothing other than seeing how the parts come together to form a beautiful whole, seeing how those logos we're getting jumps in, triggers up insight, which is a perspective of a whole. And that inspires us. That's Aphrodite. Because what? Seeing how the parts fit together in a ordered whole is beauty. That's beauty. And what do we fundamentally do as human beings? Seek beauty. That's the symposium, by the way. When Aphrodite, the goddess representing beauty, was born in the gods, meaning the aspect of being, we have justice itself, goodness itself, but when beauty itself came to birth in the realm of being, the gods had a banquet because it allowed humans a way home. Because fundamentally humans seek beauty. That's what we desire. That's what we fall in love with. And it's the love and the desire that motivates us to do something, inspires us. So if beauty itself is in the realm of being or truth, then we're naturally all philosophers. That's why the gods celebrated in the mythology of the symposium of Aphrodite coming to be born in the garden of Zeus with the gods. So, Apollo and Aphrodite, that's our sword and shield, or our dual-wielding weapons we're going to attack the text with today. Sound like fun? Let's check in with the chat. First time chatter, welcome to the chat, welcome to the stream. From Argentina, video editor. Oh, it's an ad. Oh, okay. I just got an ad. Okay, I've been doing a bit of reading and synthesis. Daemon, voice of the logos. Oh. Kako Daemon, voice of the pathologos. Oh, nice. Kakon is the Greek word for bad. So yes, there is a positive and negative logos. Very nicely put. Gathos, daemon voice of the higher soul. I don't know where this... I am not familiar with Gathos daemon. The daemon who presides over you inquisitively participates of all that concerns you, sees all things, understands all things, and in the place of conscience dwells in the most profound recesses of the mind. Wow, well said. Homer is like a daemon. It's like daemon is a play on a stage character, so self terms. The character of a man determines his destiny. And there seems to be even more advanced souls. Tri-daemon, daemons of the self. Ooh, I like that. We've been seeing how important triads are and how we have a triad skill tree that we level up. So there's a hypothesis from chatter here. What if there is a triad of daemons? We can recognize the Kako daemon, or the bad daemon, the voice that keeps alive our pathologos, which is the loud voice, which keeps us walking the path towards our problems, our repeating cycles of problems, and negative feelings that sustains our pathologos. Why? So it keeps the question alive. The question that one of the two questions we're here to solve. Purify the question of what is the false idea of the self I'm carrying. So you can say the kakodemon of your waking world, the louder voice in the everyday world, works in conjunction with the regular daemon in our dreams, because our dreams points to the nature of those problems and gives you clues and hints to solve the cause of that kakodemon, that bad daemon. So, and if there's a negative and a positive daemon, then maybe there's a ultimate daemon. Interesting hypothesis. Right, so yes, so talking about the story of Aphrodite, there are many stories about how Aphrodite came to birth. It all depends on the person who wrote the story. Like there are many stories about Batman. And they don't all agree with each other, because every author has his own level of vision and level of logos, knowing and understanding, and also their own pathologos. So at school, which doesn't recognize this, which is an absurdity, if you learn Greek mythology, you get a big book collected with all of the different stories, and it's freaking stupid. It's like going into a kindergarten and get everyone to make up a story about Spider-Man, putting all those stories together and saying, this is what Spider-Man is. It's absurd. Mythology is a way of representing the vision and logos of an author. So yeah, there are lots of different stories about how Aphrodite came to birth, depending on which author you're looking at. So that's why when we want to learn mythology, we look to Plato. Because Plato specifically is using his mythology to represent the forces and functions of the metaphysical level, of the realm of being, of our universe, of the gods. So, you don't want to mix them up. That's important. And if the writer is writing it well, then every element of the story, the analogy, the mythology, should have a corresponding element in truth. And it should be in the text somewhere. So you can say the mythology is the set of keyholes. Like in a video game, you have these 12 keyholes to find keys for. Now go out in the game and find them. So the whole game is collecting the 12 big keys, like in Mario Galaxy or something like that, 12 stars. So if there are 12 gods representing the 12 celestial gods, then there'll be 12 different forces or principles of the realm of being that would connect with them. And we're talking about Aphrodite, which was a mythology given in the Symposium, to do with the birth of Aphrodite or beauty in the realm of the gods. So we would have to unpack the Symposium to find the keys. Right. Can I ask in the chat, what's the, if you've got the Eudaimon, the good daemon, you've got the Kakodemon, and if you're positing, therefore, there must be if they are the two, if there is a hyparxis, or the top of the triad pyramid, can you talk more about what your hypothesis of what that might be? My old cat is slobbering on my foot. Oh, that sounds cute. Agathos daemon. What's your idea about that daemon? And do you have a text from which you pulled that idea? Well, we can keep it open as a question. If there is a voice of the anti-logos, or pathologos, and if there's a voice of the self-logos, is there a third? Maybe. We'll keep that as a question as we read too. Let's jump in. The more questions, the better. So, where were we in the text? Let's look at our notes. Socrates is outlining his argument for the immortality of the soul. Where is our notes? Here we go. The logos of learning as recollection. If we recollect, then it must have been known beforehand. Our seeing, hearing, and perceiving recognizes that which is both same and different. Right? That's the kind of quick argument, the demonstration. But he wasn't there, so we have to divide it up. Division. By the way, is a human and a liar different? Liar is, by the way, I got a picture here. That's a liar. Right there. It's like an instrument. Kind of like a harp. Is a liar in a sweater the same as your girlfriend? If you see your girlfriend's sweater or you saw her liar, would you remember her? Even if it's been a long time since you saw her? Even if it was a picture of her sweater, 2 steps removed. By the way, does the picture or the sweater fall short of the actual person herself? But does self-equal fall short? What does that mean? Well, you see 2 sticks and you say, oh, they're equal. Where did you get the idea of equal from? Because you can point this, show another person the same 2 sticks and they might not say it's equal. But you would never see that self-equal could appear unequal the same way 2 sticks do. Therefore, equal things, big world of becoming and bears, and self-equal are not the same. So coming back to our first argument, we recognize both same and different. But it is out of these, this is where he goes from that into the reason for things. It is out of these equal things, although different from the self-equal, that you have conceived and grasped the episteme of self-equal, which is a kind of knowing. Whether like or unlike the idea itself. Oh, I've been reading from the chat. I've been reading Numidian Platonist Apuleius, 124 to 170 CE. And they seem to be saying the same. What is seeing, hearing, and feeling the whole? It's an Ophanes question that we're carrying with us as we go. What is the whole of seeing, hearing, and thinking? And what is watching it right now? So the physical has an inner deficiency, does not reach self-equal. But things in the physical world want to be like a certain real being, but they are in need and cannot be that nature, and therefore they are inferior. 2 sticks will not be self-equal. A beautiful supermodel will not be beauty itself. It will remind you of beauty itself the most of all physical things, but by being physical will be necessarily inferior. To realize this, for those incels who hate women, here's a reason to hate women. They are always going to be inferior, even though they're beautiful. They will not be self-beauty. That's a joke. I mean, if they are going to hate women, this would be the most philosophical reason. Of course, they better be pretty close to self-beauty themselves if they're going to criticize how close other physical things. But of course, it's not a criticism. It's the nature of being in a physical body. We are in need and cannot be self-beauty, the real being. So that's a joke. Okay, so To realize that everything in the physical world wants to be a certain real being, but can't, and therefore is in need. We are in need by being physical and inferior. All right, this is Apuleius. This is the Numidian Platonist Apuleius. Interesting. To realize this whole argument, we must have somewhere caught sight beforehand of that which we're saying the physical things are like. We say two sticks are like it, then we have to have caught sight of likeness itself beforehand, or equality beforehand. Also, the self-realization is only out of seeing, hearing, and touching. Not only do the physical world seek that, but it is only out of seeing, hearing, and touching, or any other sense perception, that we get self-realization. So the necessary reason for physical world to exist, even though it falls short of being. Therefore, all things are the same in this way, and themselves reach out to, yearns for, grasps for. So even the physical things, so everything in existence, according to Socrates, has some sort of life force in it that yearns for and reaches out to and grasps for self-equal. That's interesting. So, we shouldn't hate anyone physical, because everything physical has a purpose to trigger our self-realization, which can only start from seeing, hearing, and touching sense perceptions, and realizing that they are, through this reasoning, add philosophy to the mix. Through this reasoning, you can reason to realize that they are in need and inferior, but the fact that we can recognize in them the idea itself tells us that we have beforehand grasped that which they are like. So therefore we think, oh, all things are the same, because they all reach out for that self-equal themselves, their own self-goal, but also they all, by seeking their self-goal, they benefit us in the highest way, because it's through seeing this that we can recognize that we have to realize our self-beauty, self-equal. We can remember. So they're helping themselves and they're helping others in the highest possible way. Therefore, before the act of seeing, hearing, and perceiving, before birth, we must have somewhere encountered and grasped the knowledge of self-equal that must exist. Therefore, exist means eternal and immortal in the realm of being. Before some place that our soul existed, and it was before being born. But not realize all things eager to... Yes, okay, so... the reason why he can make this claim is we must have encountered and grasped it, because it's this very argument we're in that can teach us through understanding that all things are eager to be that nature, but are inferior to the selfness, to beauty itself, to equal itself. So before we even learnt this argument, we can still recognize beauty in a physical thing, equality in sticks. Therefore, you can't say we recognize beauty and equality through understanding, because this is the first time we've been through this argument. Therefore, it must be through encountering and grasping. And that's interesting. Why? Because we've been talking about the self-logos and the good daemon and the kakor-daemon, or the anti-logos or the pathologos. One leads to our fate and our misery. One leads to our destiny and our highest happiness and well-being. And we talk about how this is a reflection of that. Our anti-logos, our problems, our pathologos is a reflection of truth. In a distorted vice, it's the vice version of the virtues. There's some alliteration there, the vice version of the virtues. Now, what's interesting is, in the same way that we didn't learn self-equal and self-beauty through logos, but through direct experience before our birth, so too did we not learn our false self the shadow of the self, the vice version of the self, we did not learn that through logos when we were little. We encountered and grasped the image of knowledge. Our parents or our earliest teachers or surrogate parents appeared to be most wise, knowing, caring, strong, etc. All of the elements, the self-er terms that refer to self and being. And that's why it's a problem, and that's why it's we are unaware of it, because we didn't learn it through logos. Which also means you can't unlearn it. If someone always thinks that they suck and they're always down on themselves, and you might be friends with them and you've said, hey, look, you don't suck. You're really good at this thing. You might find after being friends with them for a year, you've given them many, many different arguments to show why they are wrong. But what happens? It doesn't stick. Because they didn't learn it through reasoning. You have to go back to the first encounter. Who appeared most knowing when they told you you suck? And you have to apply the dialectic. So that's our second question. How is the structure? And you have to ask certain questions through the dialectic that can allow them to change their mind. So that's our third question that we are carrying with us. What should change our mind? So this is a kind of, we see the shadow of this in our pathologos, in our problems. So we sort of, in our early years, we have the encounter and grasp of the image of this. And before we were born, we have the actual grasping of this. And in our life, we had to learn the logos, which we can apply dialectically to the truth, self, but also the false or pathologos, self. The two primary questions of being human. Right, yes. Same thing applies for people who are in religion, because very rarely do people get into religion by reasoning. I mean, almost never. Which is why there's the famous point fact. You tend to have the religion your parents have. Because religion is by necessity irrational. Faith. It's the rejection of reasoning, or you have to believe something that is irrational in nature to show your faith. It is absurd to say that Mary was a virgin. There is no evidence and no logic to support that at all. But you got to believe it, because that shows your faith. Shows you're one of us. One of us. One of us. So even if you find a otherwise intelligent Christian, and you say, oh, by the way, could this have happened? Or does it make sense that all of the animals were on an ark? If there are millions and millions of animals, how big was this ark? Wouldn't they have all eaten each other? What part of the world do all of the bugs live in the same area? It's absurd. But for some reason, they'll shut off. It won't change their mind usually, because it wasn't through logos. That's why when we are going through this argument and Socrates is explaining why it's necessary for our soul to be immortal, it will feel wrong to us. Most of us. There'll be a part of us that feels like it's right because we have encountered and grasped the knowledge of our self-soul before we were born. But the way that we grew up will be counter. Keep that in mind. Right. And in the chat, we've got some other examples of false beliefs that were passed on without reasoning. Necessarily, we grasped self-knowledge before we were born. Because this whole argument we learnt before going through this, before realizing that all things are eager, everything seek out to return to the self. Therefore, the fact that we can recognize equality itself speaks to the idea that we have necessarily grasped knowledge before we're born. Let's keep going. That is the case, says Simmias. On the one hand, oh God, I hate on the one hand. Men, well, I'm just going to say, and if, in each case, we have indeed grasped and not forgotten. Actually, I'm going to find this section in another translation to see how they translate men, because I am tired of saying all those English words. 75D. Okay, 75D. Now I'm going to check. That was the Rouse. It's just then. Then if we got it before we were born and we were born having it, we knew before we were born and as soon as we were born. Not only the equal and the greater, but the less and all the rest of such things. Oh, yes. And if having got the knowledge in each case. Oh, he just says, and if. And if having the knowledge. Oh, we missed something. The next argument is we grasp it before our born, but it applies to equal, greater, and less, and all of the beings, including the good self, the just self, the holy self, the beauty. Let's do a whole bunch of highlighting here. Put it in purple. The good self, just self, holy self, beauty self, all of the beings. This applies for all of them. Necessarily acknowledge them all. And if, we don't need to say on the one hand. Just and if. I'm just going to check the other version online. Because it seems like every other line has on the one hand in this translation. 75D. And if after acquiring, yeah, just if, and if. Eat like a Platonist. Only as much as is necessary. We heard earlier in the text. Okay, and if on the one hand, we're just going to cross this out. Can I cross it out? Is there a strike through? Yes. Okay, and if in each case we have okay, let's write down the next argument. This applies to equal, greater, lesser, self beauty, BEA, self beauty, good self, self goodness, justice, holiness, I think the word would be goodness here. There's a difference between self-good and self-goodness. The good self is the ultimate. Goodness is the aspect in being. All beings. All beings. And there's that funny quote. That which absolutely is. That we stamp the seal of that which, let's say stamp the steel. To which we stamp the seal that which absolutely is. And when asking questions and answering them, when asking questions and answering questions. That's important because he has tied equal, greater, and lesser with as one class of self terms, with the other class of self terms, beauty, goodness, justice, and holiness. And he's saying not only that, but all beings, so there might be a third category, maybe, triads are fun, to which we stamp the seal that which absolutely is. Now, this theory of recollection of knowledge applies to all of the beings, but also he tied it into the dialectic because asking questions and answering them is the dialectic. So our third question, what should change our mind? What's our standard? Maybe this is a clue. Our three questions, is the soul immortal? Let's just go along with the reasoning. Number two, what's the structure through which Socrates communicates it? And number three, what's our standard to determine whether or not the argument is legit or not? Who's to say what changes your mind? No, what's to say what changes our mind? You must become sages, wisdom, prudence, and good judgment. Yes, we should know what makes good judgment. And we tie in with how we use wisdom. Okay. Back to the text. And if in each case we have grasped and not forgotten, then we must always be born knowing and have knowledge throughout our life. For to know this is to maintain a grasp on knowledge and not to lose it. We call the losing forget of this knowledge forgetting. Okay, so losing it is forgetting. So there's a part of us that is always remembering, most certainly. But if on the one hand we have indeed grasped it before birth, we lose it at birth. But then later, using our perceptions about selves, we recover the knowledge of those beings. So we do forget upon birth, and we recover it through the use of our perceptions. Recover what we possessed at some time beforehand. Would not that which we call learning be the recovering of innate knowledge? Okay, let's write that down. So what do? We forget it at birth. Forget it at birth. And then through using our perceptions, through using our perceptions, recover innate knowledge. It's there, everybody. You've got it, everybody. It's in you. You have knowledge. It's not the pathologos image of certainty. You have to do some work through your perceptions. For Platonism, I had insight. Does the body itself hold information before I was an inbuilt? Does the body hold information? I think the argument here is the soul does. The soul. Unless you mean genetic information, then maybe. In the material sense, right, yeah. Maybe there's some genetic information in your cells or something. Your cells have the information they need to be cells. As a baby goat has what it needs to be a baby goat, to be the excellence of a goat. It's a good question. This is recollection. The recovery of innate knowledge. This is recollection. That's recollection. Oh, okay. Aristotelian way of thinking that the soul doesn't have a remembering of the knowledge acquired from the realm of being. It's the seed idea. The seed has the knowledge. Right. There's an Aristotelian idea, which is the rejection of this. Aristotle likes to reject Plato. No. Your body has the information. You don't need the soul. You don't need the mind. You don't need metaphysics. You don't need the realm of being. You don't need philosophy. Just everything is a seed, has all the information, has all the potential, and then it unfolds into actuality, and then it decays again. Which is a theory that is absurd, because you can't look at a seed and see, oh, I see the potential there. It's an imagination. You have to imagine that it exists in some way. It's a way of taking out the idea of participation or sharing in the logos. By applying qualities of the mind to something other than the mind. The pen knows. Why? Don't like mind. Don't like the idea of spirituality. Don't like the idea of the soul being immortal. The beginning of the divergence away from philosophy to physicalism, reductionism. Right, there are forces that allow things in the physical world to maintain its shape. Kind of knowing, a kind of intelligence that, or force, or principle, and intelligence that allows things in our physical world to maintain their oneness. Now, in philosophy, we want to understand why that's the case and experience that intelligence that creates and maintains each instant and the oneness of each thing. What is the principle of onenesses? What is self-oneness, as we talked about self-goodness, self-beauty, self-justice? What is it that maintains the goodness of a sheep or a goat? And we want to experience it. Now, you can take away the understanding, the dianoia, and the experience by creating theories that everything is physical. That's one of the levels. Now, we're going to have fun when we get back into the Parmenides and we look at how we can use the Parmenides to recognize that this idea of Materialism is one level among 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Among 9. If there are 8 categories of the dialectic, if there's the ultimate realm of the oneself, there are four categories of the dialectic if something is: definition, demonstration, division, synthesis, analysis. And there are 4 categories of the dialectic if something isn't: then can we use our learning and understanding of the dialectic? Keep in mind, we recognize that the anagogic triad has Hermes at the top. Aphrodite, Apollo. So we've got the text, the logos, the philosophy. We've got applying it to our lives, having insights, seeing how it all fits together, and making it real for us. These things play back and forth, feed into each other, like understanding and knowledge that culminate in Hermes, which is the dialectic. So, if the dialectic is the pinnacle of philosophy, and that which brings all partial and whole souls back to the one self, or the good self, as we read, then if this is the ultimate, then wouldn't it follow that we can understand the dialectic not just in how Socrates is organizing his particular arguments about the immortality of the soul, but how we can also apply to everything, including all of the ways of thinking about the world, relating to the world, being about the world, experiencing the world? If that's the case, we should have 4 categories if something isn't, 4 if it is, but also we have to have the original precondition for the dialectic, or the cause of the dialectic itself. Why did you do the dialectic to begin with? The title of the dialectic. I want to understand what is the soul. Now, I have to say, okay, what is the soul itself? Soul itself. Define that, if it is. How does it function in relation to our body? And so on. That's what we're seeing here. We could make a dialectic of the soul. So we've got the 4 categories if the soul is, 4 categories if it isn't. Define it. How does it function? What are the implications, others to others, of that functioning? And then of those others, how does that relate? Having been affected in that way, how do those others relate back to the original? Okay, like a bike. If you have a bike, what is a bike? Wheels, handlebars, seat. How does it function? It takes you places. With that functioning, how do you relate to others? You can double your friends to the store. You can join the BMX club. You can do rad wheelies and impress girls. And finally, how do you, having been affected by all this, then relate back to your bike? You love your bike, you maintain your bike, you grease the chain, and so on. If somebody asked you what a bike was, you'd have to hit all of those categories to really outline what it is. So, materialism. Well, that's in one of those categories, like Aristotle, of existence isn't. There is no realm of existence. There is no mind. There is no pure phronesis, not of the body, or the true virtues. That's all what would happen if existence is, which gives you Stoicism. Stoicism are the same virtues, but without the upgrading to the true virtues. Stoics, they use prudence and courage and wisdom, but they don't mean this. They mean the vice version. Stoics have the vice version applied to the body. Now, we're not blaming them because they're doing their best based on their learning up until this point. Again, the translation of these texts in which we have the actual Greek along with the English, so we can discover words like phronesis are different from wisdom, discover there are hidden puzzles and questions, discover it's a mystical initiation riddle, have only recently come to light. Past translations have not given us what we need to discover this. And we've only recently got the internet. So even if we did have a special translation floating around, it would have been squashed by the institutions which have a Christian religious origin. Goes all the way back to the Latin church, which killed these philosophers. Socrates and the Phaedo is being killed by the state, the religious and political authorities. So we're not blaming them. We're understanding them and offering them a game.
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure
Where they can upgrade their Stoic virtues to the true virtues, which has to allow for there to be a thing that exists. Like we just said in the text. This grasping of knowledge is all of the beings that absolutely is. There is no self-beauty for Aristotle. There is no goodness itself for Aristotle. There is no justice or holiness or equal, lesser, and greater. They couldn't even have this conversation if they were Aristotelian or materialist or Stoic. So, with that in mind, just a little caveat to say this is not a blame game. We're not being jerks here. We're saying,
"You're a wizard, Harry."
And then we're saying,
I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure.
And then we're hoping that you will say,
Wow. Wow.
And then we will say, and I need more sound drops. Okay, so going back to what we're saying, just responding to this idea of the chat, materialism is one of the ways of thinking that can be put on the dialectic. That's how important it is. That would follow if there isn't a one that exists in the realm of being. There isn't a realm of being. So you'd be stuck there. Unless, and there's the other, so this is using the dialectic, you could judge where somebody is at, but, and as we are reading with the Phaedo, we could learn how to use the dialectic to ask them questions and answers, because we saw that this whole thing has been about also, when asking questions and answering questions, this isn't just for our own self. Well, it is for our own self, but it's also for the use of the dialectic. Using these subjects, we could ask them questions and encourage them to answer certain questions that might take them from this idea of materialism, we're all just rocks floating in space, to the idea, well, hang on a second. Maybe there are actually forces and principles in our physical world, like the bear. Socrates talked about pleasure and pain, the back and forth of opposites. Or we could ask them a question that can take them, well, hang on a second. If you think everything is just opinions, everything is just the physical world, can you jump up here? Could this physical world be a reflection of the realm of being? The unity that we seek in groups, could that be a reflection not of the back and forth principles of the everyday world, but a reflection of true being? Then we could even ask them another question and say, well, actually, hang on. If there's a reflection of true being, which is what motivates spiritual groups or religious groups, gives you a sense of higher purpose if you're a part of a group, participating in something greater than yourself, would necessarily there have to be a reflection of something. And what would it be like to experience self-goodness, self-being, truth itself? which is our question now. That's what the question we're in right now. What is self-equal, self-beauty, all of the things that we stamp the seal that which absolutely is? And how do we get back there? A little dialectic. From the chat, I've been seeing that people really do say the hot is cold, and when you can point out what they're saying is the opposite, before the people would get angry, but now I can make them laugh at it. Oh, interesting. That's good. I think that's called charm. To being able to ask these questions where people can see where they were wrong, but in a way that offers them a sharing in a higher way of being, but doesn't get them angry because they're holding on to what they were used to have. But also, pointing out the absurdity of their position might be necessary to allow for that jump up. So pointing it out in a way where they can laugh at it can make the game, can make the game fun. Moving from tragedy to comedy through philosophy. So good for you in the chat. Charm, one of the arts of Socrates. Talks about it in the Republic too. So, maybe if we were around with Aristotle, we could ask him these sorts of questions. And hey, there are a lot of Stoics and materialists out there, so we can practice even in our lifetime. Why can't I delete that? There we go. So that was a little taster. And there are so many awesome questions about this when we get back into the Parmenides. So this is a little teaser for after the Phaedo, we're getting back into the Parmenides. We can see all these sort of things because there is so much symmetry and connectiveness. There's so much a beauty and Aphrodite in this because there's a pattern. Like if we can use the dialectic. Okay, so dialectic definition is the first of the four of what is in the dialectic definition. So is the second hypothesis, brilliant light of being, is that the definition of the one that is? Therefore, could number 3 be its functioning or demonstration? How does the realm of being communicate with us? Well, we're seeing that's the Logos. That's what we're doing. We're reading the Logos to see it in the text. And we're also applying it to our lives to go from Apollo to Aphrodite to make insights. And we're seeing that there's a voice of the daemon that benefits us providentially. So could we say that the Logos, the self-Logos, is represented by hypothesis 3? But we could also understand that as the demonstration. But if this is reflected down here, if the opposite of number 2 is number 6, if this is the realm of being, then what would be the equivalent in the realm of becoming, of the ultimate principle? If you take away the idea of being as the ultimate principle and paradigm of truth that we seek as philosophers, which is why we want to follow Socrates where he's going, what's the equivalent if you don't allow the world of being and you're just in the world of becoming? What's the definition that would be represented by the level of understanding and state of mind development of hypothesis 6 in Parmenides? Well, what's a principle but has to be physical? People who think that there are fundamental universal principles of the universe that are not being, it's not absolute truth, it's Marxism. Is a fundamental principle that governs our everyday world, that can make sense of the problems we face as humans. And so I want to live according to that to make a better world. I want to become a Marxist or join with other Marxists or socialists. Because this is a defining principle that governs the world of becoming, and we either are being exploited by not participating in that, or we do become Marxists and socialists and start a political party and whatever else, so we can act according to that principle of the realm of becoming. Then the next question is, well, what about number 7? How would it function? What would be, if this is the logos, what would be the version of the logos that doesn't allow for the self-logos from being? Wouldn't that be, what's the, if the self-logos has that ultimate greater and lesser analogical unfolding and returning that we can see here, ultimate, greater and lesser, and we can see analogies that we can use for thinking. Socrates is using it in his dialectic. Hey, isn't being awake and asleep the lesser that is like being alive and dead in the greater? But we talked about the bear versus man argument. If there is a greater way of being, there's also the lesser of the virtues, and there are terrible people who are just looking for an opportunity to play out their pathologos, their vice version of virtue, their ignorance. That's the human thing that allows for consciousness, which participates in being. But if we take that out, we're left in the realm of the bear. What does the bear do? Goes back and forth between opposites. Is either sleeping or awake. Is either hunting for food or is content and full. Might maul you or might not be interested in you, depending on where he's at. Back and forth. An interplay of warring opposites. Number 7. So this is the way of thinking where people think, oh, you know what reality is? It's just a big battleground. The forces of good fighting against the forces of evil. And the earth is just the physical place where it takes place. Therefore, yay Armageddon. Yay Holy War. Yay all that apocalypse stuff that motivates a lot of people. The physical world is a warring battleground between the forces of left and right. Which can be, is a way of thinking that has its own logic, but can be understood within a greater whole of the dialectic. Pretty cool. So we're learning the dialectic, not just how we can communicate a particular argument about the soul, but Socrates has to recognize which part of this ladder is the person he's talking to. Which level is Simmias at? Well, he must be up here because he does admit there is beauty itself and justice itself and equality itself. So he does admit for stamping the seal of that which absolutely is. That's why Socrates asked him at the beginning, hey, where you at? Where you stuck? What's your problem? What are you not following? What do you not trust? So not only are we learning the dialectic of how to use it within the particular arguments, but we're recognizing that this dialectic not only refers to the parts, but the whole. To even talk to someone, wouldn't it be worth recognizing, are they a materialist? Are they a nihilist? Are they at that warring between opposites? And bear logos, physical world kind of principle? Are they a Marxist or a socialist or a communist or a capitalist? And so on for each level. Where are they at? And hey, it's the same structure for our arguments and the whole, for the parts and the whole. It's the logos all the way through. It's turtles all the way down, folks. It's dialectic all the way down. And using the dialectic all the way up. Which is cool. What do you say, Owen?
Wow. 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 Wow.
From the chat. Naming the thing that stops you by the name of nothing. This drink's like nectar and ambrosia all in one. The Cyclops. The Cyclops. Be so kind as to give me some more and tell me your name at once. Odysseus obliged. My name is nobody. That is what my father and mother and my friends have always called me. Asking why they call it nothing gets the laugh. They say, I don't know. Reality is like number. A number, the number, n number. Oh, the greater, ultimate, greater, and less. You can have a particular number. You can have number itself. And you can have the cause or precondition for number. You can have selves in body in the world of becoming. You can have the selves in being, beauty itself, justice itself, the soul itself. But even for those selves, if there are many selves in being, that requires a precondition of the one self. Because all of these are ones, meaning you have to have one precondition. They're all selves, you must have self. And the one self is the first hypothesis of Parmenides, which we have on YouTube. Find it as a playlist if you're interested in that first one. And after the Phaedo, we're going to get back into the Parmenides and jump back into the second hypothesis and keep going. And we'll probably find all these. So this is an awesome trailer. I need some cool trailer music. So this whole thing has been a teaser and a trailer for this has been a trailer for the Parmenides that we're going to refer to, go back to after we finish the Phaedo. Tune in next time. All right, that's my trailer music. Back into the text. So learning is the recovery of innate knowledge. This is recollection. Yes. Now what? Surely then. Notice he's bringing him with him. He's not fighting him. He's not against him. It's not the warring back opposites. He's not fighting him like a bear in the woods. They're together. It's the vice. It's the virtue version of that humans can do. Ah. Do you have a link to that music? Surely then, this was seen to be indeed possible. For when one perceives either by seeing or hearing, or in another way perceives something, by grasping something different or other, they realize that they forgot. And from this thing, which approaches this by likeness or unlikeness, the stick is like and unlike, equal. So that, as I said, one of these two is the case. Either we indeed were born with the knowledge of selves, and we know throughout our life, or afterwards, by which we call to learn. But rather, this is nothing than recollection, and learning will be recollection. So, two options. We either always remember it, or we forget it and have to remember it, and that's learning. Let's start another set over here. So, next, we either one. We either one always know throughout life, or two, we forget at birth. We forget and have to remember. Recollect is the word, not remember. To recollect, which is interesting. because we're supposed to collect ourselves together, says Socrates in the Phaedo. And also says Parmenides. Oh, thanks for the link. We have to the dialectic is a process of collecting ourselves together. Maybe I don't want to play that music on stream because I might get my video taken down. I'm not sure about terms. I'm using music that's allowed to be played on streams right now until I have time to make my own. I'm a musician, so I want to make my own music that represents what we're reading if I can, as soon as I have time. Yeah, so if you know about good sources of royalty music that slap, let me know. I'll check out those channels. Send a link in chat if you can. So, therefore, which alternative do you choose, Simir? So he's asking him, he's letting him play. Either we're born with that knowledge and we have it our whole lives, or that we recollect the knowledge we had previously grasped. Simir says,
What?
and then he says, I can't make a choice at the present time. He says,
Come on, man.
and he says,
Flibbity gibbity nonsense.
and he says,
What in the heck are we talking about here?
and that's all my drops. What the heck are we talking about, says Simmias. Socrates says, how about the following way? Can you make a choice and say in what way it appears to you in the case of self? Would a person that has knowledge be able to give the logos that they know or not? This is fundamental, okay? So whatever we're calling episteme, that's the E-P-I-S-T-A-M-E-N-O-S. Let me make sure I got that right. Epistemos. That's our episteme word here. Not only requires knowing it, conceiving and grasping at some stage before we were born in that other place. Thanks for the links. But being able to give a logos of it, which helps us because we have a lot of questions about this. We've had questions about lots of things. First of all, we've been talking about how the spiritual initiation that he's been talking about, the mystic initiation, is from the virtues. Where are they? From sound-mindedness, courage, wisdom, and justice into sound-mindedness, courage, self-phronesis, and justice. So in this initiation, wisdom relates to being in some way. He used the being as a transition. He said, hey, look, we start with these virtues. Here are they. There are they. By the way, we can swap them with being, vitality, and activity, which is our triad. Being, power, vitality, or activity. That's our fundamental triad, which we can see Hermes is the being of the anagogic movement, the leader, the ruler. The power we get from Aphrodite, and the activity is through Apollo, through reading this text together with where we are. So even that follows this fundamental being, power, and activity triad that's inherent to reality and the logos. So he said, hey, by the way, you can use that to understand the virtues. Why? Because I'm going to swap courage for vitality. I'm going to swap wisdom for being. And then I'm going to say there's a rite of initiation that we go through in philosophy that you come out the other side with. And he said you trade in the virtues for the golden coin that you trade. Thank you for all the links. That looks awesome. That you trade all the virtues in for. Phronesis, the actual reason, the upgrading, the trading. So wisdom becomes self-phronesis, and through being, he changes wisdom to being. So our question is, what the heck is wisdom and how does it relate to being? And we hypothesized, and then we looked at the vices. Here are the vices. You have a kind of sound-mindedness because you master some pleasures, but only to be better at doing your other pleasures, better at pursuing your vices. Vice. So the vice version of sound-mindedness. Wisdom we looked at in the Republic too. The vice version, you have a clarity of sight, you have a planning and caring for yourself, a seeing, a planning and understanding. It's a kind of phronesis, but it's directed towards the body. So, what's missing? We said, well, what's missing is our sound-mindedness is not directed towards logos and knowledge. It's not directed towards being, it's still in the realm of becoming, the body. Courage, you still are afraid of death, but you do it because you have to. So you don't have an understanding about death. And what's death? The realm of being. So again, you don't have an understanding or logos of being, and you don't have knowledge of it. So you're afraid of it. So you have the vice version of courage. Wisdom, what are you directing your understanding and planning and seeing to? The physical world. So you're clever. So you can plan out how to act your vice, how to do these things. So it's the vice version of wisdom. So what's lacking? The direction towards being as one's focus and the logos and understanding of that realm as your focus for sound-mindedness, as what you hold on to as courage, as what you plan with in true wisdom, as what you use to in your functioning with the dialectic at all times for justice. So our question therefore is, we can use that. If that's what's missing in the vices, we can take that back to our question, what the heck is wisdom? Because it relates to being, and it gets upgraded from wisdom to self-phronesis. The vice version of wisdom lacks the same thing all the vices lack, logos and directed to being. So, loosely speaking, we could say maybe wisdom is logos directed to being that gets upgraded to self-phronesis when you actually have the experience of knowledge. Maybe. That could make sense of the transition, the rite of initiation. And this is the innate power that's in us. The self-phronesis was said to be different from these other four virtues because it's innate. It just depends on where you direct your focus, causing these to be actual vices or virtues. But also it doesn't lose its power. So it's a kind of learning and development that we can take with us into the next life. That's why it's so important. And also we want to be, and by the way, when you add phronesis to those virtues, they upgrade to the true virtues. It's also mentioned in the symposium. Once you experience beauty itself, then you have to nurture the virtues, upgrade them. So we've been loosely saying, well, something to do with logos and something to do with knowledge is wisdom. Maybe the two of them together is wisdom. Or maybe logos directed to knowledge is wisdom, and then once you have knowledge, it's phronesis. But it's something to do with knowledge and wisdom. With logos and knowing, which helps us because later we went on to say, well, hang on a second, we're following something here, a pattern. We said we began this channel asking what is philosophy and how do we do it? And now we're far enough in our learning of the logos and the dialectic to recognize, oh, that's definition and demonstration. What is philosophy is the definition of it. How do we do it is how do we function or demonstrate it? Wow.
Wow.
Okay, so what is philosophy then? Gotta know what it is to do it. Well, we're discovering, hey, he keeps talking about dianoia and nous. Understanding is defining something. Your direct experience of it is demonstrating it in your own direct experience. Definition, demonstration again. So again, understanding and knowledge. Dianoia, which is the logos, and then, okay, well, so what is understanding then? Because he said, hey, dianoia leads to nous. So what the heck is this dianoia? It's next level down. What is dianoia? It's two things again. Dialectic all the way down, people. It's turtles all the way down. Okay, so what's the divide definition up? What's the definition of a dianoia? The self-logos. How does it demonstrate itself? Through the dialectic. So what we're doing now, we're listening to the logos of Socrates about the immortality of the soul, and we're seeing how he demonstrates it through the dialectic. But then we realize, hang on a second, definition and demonstration all the way down, the dialectic has 4 parts. So we can divide each of those steps even further. The definition, the demonstration, but we can also add the next 2 parts of the dialectic, division and synthesis. Then we recognize, Socrates' doctrine was the definition of philosophy. And then he gave a demonstration by giving 4, interesting, there are 4 categories. 4 arguments for the immortality of the soul. He gave 3 and Cebes gave 1. And then Simmias jumped in and says, I don't quite follow. Can you divide up the theory of learning as recollection so I can synthesize those arguments and change my mind? That's synthesis and analysis. Take those arguments, understand them, apply it back to the topic, and change my mind. That's progression. That's learning. So, interesting that we hypothesized. Again, this is just an if. Nice. So we logos and dialectic defines understanding. And we just read Socrates saying, by the way, if you have knowledge of something, you should be able to give a logos of it. How artfully you give it with the dialectic is in question. But you should be, like, you might not have learned how to use the dialectic yet, but you could give logos of it. And what's logos and dialectic? Understanding. So cool. So we're on the right track. The logos is unfolding upon itself to give us a thumbs up. Thumbs up. So, if somebody has knowledge, so of our 2 questions, so given what we've seen in our argument so far, there are 2 options for any of those beings in being. We either always know it through our life, or forget it at birth and through our perceptions recover our innate knowledge, which is called recollection. So we either know it through our life or we forget it and we have to recollect. Simmias says, I don't know which one I should pick. And Socrates says, well, if you know something, shouldn't you also be able to give a logos of it? So whatever knowledge is for Socrates and Simmias here, be able to give logos of it. And they recognize that knowledge also implies and requires giving a logos of it. We might relate that to being at a dance festival or a rave or something with your friend. He takes a huge hit of acid and he has this experience of knowledge. He separates from his body in some way, experiences the realm of being, and he says, oh, I know the meaning of life. The next day you ask him about it and you ask him, hey, can you explain it? And he can't give a logos of it. So he might have had the encounter, but we can't call it knowledge unless he's used the logos to get there, or he has logos with it in his as an aspect of his development, such that he is familiar enough with the experience and he can understand the experience enough through his logos to give an account of it. You know the meaning of life, dude? Sure, man. What is it? the trees are alive, dude. That's a poor logos of knowledge. So we wouldn't call that knowledge, says Socrates, and Simmias agrees. Even if it was a genuine experience of the realm of being, logos is needed. From the chat, my aunt, who's a Christian, I was asking about their God, and I asked how many it was. It got funny when we agreed it would have to need a father, a son, and a spirit, as that is too many things. And then they had to leave really fast. If God is one, what about these three? Her world is only as big as her God, and that is very small and limited and not very good. Right. No need, which is an important idea. That's why we see the stakes. In this channel, we've been talking about why is philosophy important? Why is it so meaningful? Why do we have to awaken it up to remove the problems in our life and reach our highest destiny, and also to save humanity from its destruction? Because the dialectic is what we need to be able to understand the dynamics and the cause of our problems and our destiny, and also what we need to solve those things through the use of the dialectic. In other words, we're giving the stakes. We're seeing the stakes of it. Because like your auntie, if there's no need, then it's easier to hold on to your false beliefs, your ignorances, your prejudices, and your pathologos. Especially if you benefit in some way because you're in a leadership position and you think, oh, I have a lot of money, I have a lot of fame. So why not let humanity die? Why not let genocides happen? Why not let human problems continue to be not understood? Stakes. That's why we ask, what is philosophy? How do we do it? And why should we care? Gives you the stakes, gives you some sort of motivation and inspiration to actually go through the work, challenging work, difficult work to purify yourself, but also worth it. And it's the best game in town.
You're a wizard, Harry.
So maybe part of the artful questioning is finding what is interesting enough in your auntie's life that she values reaching with excellence, such that she's willing to go through this dialectic with you. Which is why excellence is important. And having an art is important. An artist always tries to get better. They need to get up on stage. And then once they're up on stage, they need to play at a bigger venue and go from the coffee shop to the pub, to the stadium and so on. There is something motivating you to progress and to keep learning and growing and changing. And we can look at people like Trump, who has had the wealth and the fame his whole life and had no reason to change his mind. We are interested in our soul, whether or not it's immortal, because it's necessary for philosophy, for Socrates' doctrine. So we have stakes. We can't do what Socrates is saying unless we know our soul is immortal. We can't do a dialectic on being if we don't think there is a realm of being, because there's no soul out of the body. We can't pull off the yoga if we don't think our soul can exist out of the body. We wouldn't want to pursue Socrates to the place of being dead where he's headed as fast as we can if we don't think there's an immortal soul. These are stakes for us, which is why we enjoy this channel. Right, and using humor is a good way of doing that too. That's a kind of an art. Part of a joke is to take someone down one line of thinking, usually a familiar one, and then suddenly take them off in a new direction. And if they can hold both ways of thinking in their mind, they can see the absurdity of one and the obviousness of another. That can make you laugh. A simple example, a dyslexic man walked into a bar. Now, I took you down a little road there, expecting a certain conclusion. Someone walked into a bar. But then I took you on a sharp tangent. You walked into a bra. You can see the both, and then you can see why this one has to be true based on the premises of the dyslexic man. It's not the best joke in the world, but it's a simple one to illustrate it. You could say this is kind of the format of going from what we believe is true, our fate, and the road that we're walking in our life following our problems, to a sharp turn to realize actually the whole time we have knowledge and logos within us of the truth. And that's more obvious and clear. And it's funny that we thought that. Tragic if we can't get out of it. That's a tragedy, following the implications that you're stuck in without the ability to move into the better. But philosophy can allow you to make that change, which can make you smile. So a little bit of a tangent there about talking to our aunties. Nice. So, if you knew it, wouldn't you have to necessarily give a logos of it? Simia says, certainly, they must necessarily be able to do so. So this stands out to us. He is using, so what's our third question? What should make us change our mind? Necessity is one of the things. It's necessarily so. So there's some sort of rational necessity to the arguments that should allow us to change our minds. So if someone came along and said, oh, I knew everything from birth, which is, by the way, pathologos. I already know everything. Well, if you know something, shouldn't you be able to give a logos to it? Well, I can't. Then you don't know it. Necessarily. Oh no, but I like to act like I know. That's the appeal of the pathologos. You get to act certain. Act like an alpha. Act like you're no shit. You don't know. That's the appeal. It's the appeal of this white people. That's the desire to be the knower. Without the logos is what grifters play into. Politicians play into. Hope and change. I'm going to make life better for you. What's the logos? Shut up. No logos. No dialectic. But we say necessarily you don't know if you can't give a logos. Socrates says that therefore, does it appear that to you that everyone can give a logos of those cells we mentioned? Everyone recognizes equal. Everyone recognizes an idea of beauty. Everyone has an idea of justice of some kind. And goodness, everything they do, they think is good for them. Have you met anybody who can give a logos of those things? Self-beauty, self-justice, self-goodness, self-equal, self-greater, self-less? Have you? In your world? Simia says, I only wish they could. Same answer I give. I wish I knew people like that. But I fear that tomorrow at this time, not even one man will be left who is able to give a logos of those cells we've been talking about in a worthy way. Kind of how we might feel in our world. Without Socrates, who's left? We all are. We can get there. We'll get there together. Accordingly then, does it not appear to you that everybody knows selves? Not at all. If no one has been able to give a logos of these things in being, then nobody knows selves. So we're not born knowing and not forgetting. Accordingly then, they recollect it when they learned it at a later time. There's our optimism. Even when they killed Socrates, we can get there. All we need to do is that which allows us to recollect, and that's learning. At what time then would our souls grasp the knowledge of selves? Certainly not after the time we were indeed born. No doubt. Before that time. Yes. Accordingly then, O Simius, our souls have... Okay, let's nail down these arguments. Therefore, no one is born knowing, but must recollect or learn what our souls grasped before birth. The knowledge of selves grasped before birth. Interesting. Before you were born, you knew stuff. You knew being. That's interesting. Question in the chat. At what age do we grasp we have a soul? I don't know. Depends what you mean by grasp. I know adults who don't believe we have a soul. Sometimes very clever and otherwise successful ones. They're materialists. They're over here. They're with Aristotle over here. We don't have a soul. We just have a body. Our consciousness is just a byproduct of materialism. We're just chemicals and neurons. No soul. From what I've seen, a nice way of going with that is to say, well, hang on a second. Is there an aspect of yourself that desires inwardly? Is there a part of you that moves outwardly in the world, goes out and does stuff, has activities? Is there a part of you that plans and cares for your well-being? So if we take these aspects that we can all agree with, even if we're materialist, we could call those as a soul. We can call that the soul, the unification or the unity of those psychic aspects that we can all recognize. We all had that inward desire. We all want to eat sandwiches. We all want to do stuff in the world, have an activity, have a hobby, go to the park, be famous, whatever. And there's something that we recognize in us that plans the best way of getting a sandwich, plans the best activity for your day. So even if you don't think it has an existence in being, you can, through that kind of question and answer, be led to accept, okay, there is something we can at least call a soul that isn't physical but has those psychic aspects. And then you can go through a dialectic and that moves them from the world of what if the being isn't, either step by step through the stages, or there are certain kinds that have a there are certain levels that have transition points. Like in Mario Brothers, there are certain that are like certain levels in the Parmenides that are like a warp zone to a different, to like you can warp from level from world 3 to world 5. You could go from world 3 to world 4, or you can take a warp zone. There are certain kinds of relationships within the dialectic of our psychic evolution that we can see in Parmenides. So that's something fun. There's another. Where's my trailer music? It's another taster. There are certain levels that you can make warp zone movements in your psychic development, in your personal or philosophical growth, that can be seen within the 9 hypotheses of Parmenides. And with good use of our Hermes, from our learning that we're getting in the Phaedo, the use of the dialectic, we can recognize these stages, and maybe we can find those warp zones and take them to make quicker, more swift progress up to our ultimate destiny of the one self. Is 8 the negation of 4? Is 4 the reflection of 2? What other things can we see? How many patterns and relationships are happening within this? Find out in our next series, where we go back to the Parmenides with the dialectic from the Phaedo in our back pocket. This has been a trailer. A teaser. Yay. Bit silly. But yeah, so we're talking about using it with our friends and our aunties and stuff. That's a good way of getting people into thinking about the soul, which is important because we're going through this big argument about the soul. Reasoning about the soul. Therefore, no one is born knowing, but must recollect and learn the knowledge of selves that they grasp before their birth. So a good thing to know that we at one stage knew it. Transformations are like in dreams when a werewolf. Pokemon, gotta catch them all. How does Pokemon relate? Gotta catch all, we gotta see all of the connections within the Parmenides. That would be nice. So, accordingly then, Simius, our souls previously existed apart from the body before they existed in a human form, where they possessed mindfulness. So here's our phronesis. Sorry guys. Accordingly then, O Simius, our souls. So that's what learning is. The conclusion we get about our soul is that it existed apart from the body before our human form, but it possessed phronesis. What the heck? Why does that follow? Because we grasped being of the selves, we had mindfulness. We had phronesis. Interesting. This adds more to our puzzle or our theory, maybe the upgrade of wisdom as a virtue, which we have to do through practice and habit, is what we recognize all of the vices, if they lack logos and they weren't directed towards being, they were directed towards the body. So if you lack logos of being, then you'll fear death, and so you won't have true courage. If you lack logos of being, you won't desire it. You'll desire things of the becoming, the body. So you'll have vice and not actual sound-mindedness. Likewise, if you lack logos, you might be very clever in your thinking, and if you're not directing your logos to being, you might be very clever at getting things for your body and become a great tyrant. It's the vice version of wisdom. So we see essential for all of the virtues is logos. Now, wisdom seems to be logos directed towards being, perhaps. And our question was, well, hang on a second. Philosophy seems to be logos and knowing. In that argument, we just saw Socrates say, hey, if you know something and you knew it from birth, shouldn't you be able to give a logos of it? So knowledge is logos, but also being. And then Socrates said, therefore, before we were born, we grasped being, but we also had phronesis. So it sounds like phronesis might be that grasping of knowledge that you can't lose or forget. So long as you're out of the body and you have that grasping, maybe. Why? Because it's innate. So we knew it at some stage, but also it doesn't lose its power. That was the other. So that was the other thing we said about it. It doesn't lose power. It was innate. Innate. And doesn't lose its power. So if Socrates is saying we had phronesis before we were born because we knew we were grasping being in the selves, does that help us with our question of what the heck phronesis is? Something to do with grasping being, but also something to do with an upgrade of wisdom, which seems to be logos directed towards being. Maybe wisdom is the logos directed about being, and the direct experience of it and the knowing of it is phronesis. But also it has to be in a sense where you can't lose its power. Not sure. These are questions and hypotheses. Chat is singing the Pokemon song. You got to catch all of the virtues, and then you got to find phronesis. Unless we are, and so therefore, we our souls existed apart from the body before human form and possessed mindfulness. So we've got a clue about our big question: what the heck is phronesis? Because we are lovers of phronesis as philosophers. In fact, that helps us see that, if we are lovers of learning, we become lovers of wisdom when we realize that's the thing we should be learning. And then that's a lover of wisdom is philosophia. But then he said we're also a lover of phronesis with philophronesis. So that seems like the upgrade of philosophy. Curious. So, therefore, our souls existed. Our souls existed. Existed previously. Apart from the body. Before in human form. Before existing. Give it a little e because it's not the existence. Existing in human form. You're transformed into a human form. And also, when they possessed mindfulness, when they possessed, and the word mindfulness is the loose translation the author gives for the real word, possessed. Phronesis. Phronesis. It's a big one. You are a lover of pretty people just like Socrates. Sure. And he's saying, hey, it's through our observation of pretty people, the use of our perceptions, that we recover our innate knowledge, which is recollection, which is learning, And what we're learning is that which we knew before we were born. Therefore, our souls existed previously, apart from our body, before you had your physical incarnation. And when you were in that realm, you possessed not mindfulness. So you better make sure that you start by loving pretty things and then ask the question, what is prettiness itself? Because all things are the same in that they reach out for self-prettiness. And you can only get your self-realization of prettiness itself by first recognizing, reminding yourself of it through your senses. So, we possessed phronesis. And then Simius goes on to say, well, unless we acquire these kinds of knowledge at birth, so that's the third option. We either had it before we were born, meaning our souls existed somewhere before this incarnation, and in that time we possessed phronesis. We grasped the knowledge of beings in some way. Still a question mark what the heck it is. And either we keep it through our lives, meaning we'd be able to give a logos of being and beauty and justice and so on, which we can't. Socrates could. And we are getting there ourselves. Good for us. Or the other option, well, either that, or we knew it for our whole lives. So we either knew it from birth, and everyone's brilliant, no one has to learn. Conservatives will say that. Not just conservatives, anybody who doesn't want to learn or has that loyalty to knowledge usurped by the image, the vice, the shadow, and doesn't want to learn, they'll say, I know everything already, but we can see clearly they don't because they can't give a logos of these ideas. Therefore, we can't remember it our whole life. We must forget it at birth and have to remember it through learning, recollection. Simius said, well, there's a third option that you're missing. We could have acquired the knowledge not before we were incarnated, but at birth. So in the chat, when I see a pretty thing, how does my neurons know what it is and to react to it? Right, so that's materialism again. It's not your neurons, they are physical things. So think of it this way. Would you say your eyes see a pretty thing? Or would you say it's through your eyes that you see a pretty thing? Thumbs up. So people who are materialists would say, oh no, my eyes see and my ears hear. And we would say, well, hang on a second. Wouldn't it be more accurate to say that you see through your physical? Yes, exactly. Your physical senses allow you to pick up certain frequencies within a certain spectrum. But there are other things you can't perceive through them. Out of your body, that opens up a new question. What's your perception going to be? What frequencies can you see? What dimensions can you see when you have pulled off this stunt and you've separated yourself from the body? Maybe return to the realm of being, maybe. I don't know. It sounds like Socrates is saying there's an intermediary step, because he's saying, look, separate yourself from the body as much as you can and stay there, but also collect yourself together out of the body. So it sounds like there might be an intermediate step where you can separate yourself from the body, allowing you to do philosophy easier. He's saying, hey, your body gives you little leisure for philosophy. You got to chase after its pleasures and pains and fears and illusions and foolishness. And even when you do have time for philosophy, it comes flooding in. So practice separating yourself from your body to do philosophy. So maybe there's a level between our body and the realm of being where we have phronesis, where our soul, so maybe goes body, the realm of soul, and then the realm of being. Maybe it's a hypothesis. If you can pull it off, if it's working for you, share your insights and your experiences and your understanding in the chat so we can all benefit from it. Okay, so the third option, maybe we didn't get it before we were born, but when we are born, we get the knowledge. Socrates says, if this is the case, then at what time did we lose that knowledge? For surely we are not in possession of selves, the knowledge and logos of selves, at our birth, as we just agreed, or like we're not born knowing it, we just said that. So do we lose that knowledge at the very time we acquire it? If we get it at birth and not before we're born, do we get it and lose it at the same time? Or do you have another time that you can mention? Simius says, not at any other time, Socrates, since it escaped my notice that I was saying nothing, talking nonsense. Hey, saying nothing, chat. Take notice then, O Simius. Must the following be the case for us? If on the one hand, that which we're always murmuring is the case. Okay, I want to look up what always murmuring is. Because I haven't been online for a while. So which means I have to ask for Jarvis. Jarvis, are you there?
Allow me to introduce myself. I am Jarvis.
Can you please pull up the internet?
Importing all preferences from home interface.
Jarvis, what are you doing? Jarvis. Jarvis, that's not right.
Importing all preferences from home interface.
There you go. There's my guy.
Systems are now fully operational.
Right. So in the chat, they're asking their computer, okay, Google, do Platonism. That'd be funny. Start to chat GPT and see what happens. Okay, so I'm checking out this. Okay, Jarvis, do Platonism. Okay, here's the word. Threomen. Threomen. Threomen means in Greek, in English. Make a confused noise, chatter, babble, repeat over and over. Oh, okay, right. So we got two options. We could either have repeating over and over, which is something that he said, or make a confused noise. Well, okay, both translations give us those two options. Let's get back into the text. Now, it might be a play on the words because the text says, that which we're always murmuring about is the case. So us philosophers are always saying that the beautiful and the good and every ousia like this, we also refer to things from which perception arrives to that same ousia. All the things that we see, the beauty, the good, every ousia is the same ousia. By discovering that they exist according to a hyparxis prior to ourselves. And so we must necessarily compare those selves, and just as if they do exist in this way. And it must also be in the same way for our soul. It must be in this way prior to our birth. But if on the one hand, oh God, if. Stop saying on the one hand, just say if. Cross that out. Okay. If they do not exist in any other way, could this logos even be discussed? What the heck does that mean? So he's saying that all of the beings that we talk about are the same ousia. That's huge. It's all the same ousia. So in that way we could say, in one sense, well, all of these different ideas are intellectual distinctions we can make about the experience of the brilliant light of pure being. It's the same ousia, however. It's the same oneness. So they have their hyparxis. Hyparxis is where all the points come to meet at the top of the pyramid. That's the hyparxis. So while we say that there's beauty itself and goodness itself and all the other cells, all the other Usias, is essentially the same Usia. And he's saying the same happens for our soul. Okay, so this idea of murmuring is one. We're murmuring, we're chattering, which could be talking nonsense like he said earlier. But the other translation is repeating. Now, earlier in the text, at the end of Socrates' doctrine, he says this: "Such, I believe, O Simmias, must be the doctrine we repeat to each other and believe, at least all those who are right lovers of learning." So part of his doctrine is, how do we relate to philosophy? How do we relate to each other as philosophers, others to others, that section of the dialectic? We repeat this to each other. We go over it again and again. Lots of repetition in this podcast. Lots of repetition, thumbs up. Lots of repetition applying it to personal problems, talking with our aunties, understanding the soul, understanding how to talk to Aristotelians, understanding how to make sense of YouTube podcasts that are otherwise nice, but like the logos. It's repetition. So when Socrates says, hey, that which we are murmuring to each other, or he actually uses this expression before again. He says, earlier in the text, he says, "Surely then, what about the acquisition of self-phronesis? Is the body an obstacle to it? Whenever one takes the body in common with the search, I mean the following. Do human beings comprehend any truth by sight and by hearing? Or is it the same that the poets are forever murmuring to us?" So it's kind of a diss at poets. Poets are forever murmuring to us that we neither hear nor see anything correctly. So the poets, hey, I thought this, or I saw this, my beloved was this, but I was not hearing her right, or I was not seeing it for what it is. Okay, sure. But murmuring is kind of a diss. The other translation is repeating. Do the poets repeat that we don't really see the truth through our eyes and our ears? We have to use our soul or our hearts or something else, our intuition. Things are not always the way they seem. Isn't that a standard thing for songs and poems and poetry? Things were not, things were not the way they appeared when I first got into that relationship, says every Taylor Swift song. So she repeats it over and over again. Okay, so that's the idea of murmuring. So it's not really a diss, it's talking at the idea of repetition. But he's distinguishing philosophers from poets by saying what we repeat to each other is the doctrine, the Phaedo doctrine. That philosophy is the art and practice of death and dying, which we do through the dianoia, which prepares us for the direct experience of nous, which upgrades the virtues that we've been putting in through practice and repetition, again, repetition. And that dianoia happens by the learning of the self-logos, which we're doing together on our channel, and applying it, demonstrating it, functioning with it through the dialectic, which allows us to also understand definition and demonstration, understand the very search we're on, and allows us to relate using the dialectic to our friends in a beneficial and good way. As Parmenides says, even more appreciation and gratitude should be given to those who come back and help others. And we can do all this in a better way if we can separate our soul from the body and collect ourselves together away from the body. Let's nail it down. If we separate the soul from the body as far as possible and be accustomed to, again, through repetition. Oops. Accustomed to gathering herself together from all quarters and to, again, collect self, bring together out of body and to dwell alone as far as she is able, both now and in the future, being liberated, as it were, from chains of the body. That liberation and separation of the soul is called death, And those who practice philosophy in the right way are always most eager to liberate self, and that's the separation of the soul from the body. And this is the self-study and exercise of the philosophers, which is also the self-study and exercise of philosophers earlier called the dialectic by Parmenides. So therefore, those who practice philosophy correctly are studying to die and fear death least. And throughout their life, they yearn for phronesis, which comes from being crossed over from the body, being liberated. So one is truly a lover of phronesis. Then they seek to be out of the body, because that's where you get the true phronesis, which is an innate virtue which doesn't lose its power but can cause vice if you do not direct it towards that experience and from that experience. If not, you're going to be a lover of the body, which is going to make you a lover of riches or lover of honors, or both. One or both. That's going to be your life, your fate, if you don't do this. So therefore, we kind of treat lightly our body in philosophy and only do what is necessary. If not, we will have the vice virtues. We will have a kind of fake phronesis, or a kind of intemperance, a temperance through intemperance, or a kind of cowardice courage. The only currency we do all this for is for phronesis. To have that as a kind of rite of initiation, which is a kind of riddle which we're trying to solve in this text, which makes us a true mystic. Many other staff bearers, few are the inspired mystics, and those are those who practice philosophy correctly. So we're undergoing both a purification from what is false and a perfecting of our logos through the dianoia. When we get that world, we'll find good masters and good friends to talk about philosophy with, to practice this. And therefore, if this is the case, then and if we don't do this, we won't be free from our calamities. But instead, if we can, we'll realize that we do. Our soul does possess a power and phronesis out of the body. This is what we have to repeat over and over again. So I just did a little repetition there just because to show what I'm talking about. Therefore, he's not dissing the poets. He's saying the poets forever repeat that we don't see the truth through our eyes and ears. Philosophers say we don't see the truth through any of the senses. And if we keep doing it that way, we're going to get vice. So, the word is not murmuring as a diss. He's distinguishing it from the poets. So, what does he say we have to repeat later on in the text where we are right now? He says, hey, listen, buddy. That's the text. It says, hey, listen, buddy. Here, murmuring. So, Simius, that which we are always repeating, not murmuring, we're not dissing philosophers, repeating, because that's how we relate others to others in the game. Repeating and trusting and confirming through our understanding and our knowledge, upgrading us to phronesis from wisdom. That the beautiful and the good in every ousia, which we refer all things from the perceptions arise. Everything from the perceptions point to the ousia of the beautiful, the good, and all the other things equal. Same, different. From the same ousia. They all existed, all things that desire and reach back for the phronesis of all of these things. It's the same ousia. There is a hyparxis of ousia. There's a single ousia, the self ousia. That's what Socrates says, it's woven through all of the beings. It's the same ousia. So it's a hyparxis. He says, hey, look, if they exist in this way, it must also be in the same way for our soul. What does that mean? Well, the only way I can seem to make sense of that, we have our individual souls, just like we have beauty and then justice and then goodness and then two sticks looking the same and then a picture of our girlfriend being like her but also unlike her, not falling short but still reminding us of her. All of these things in our world of particulars that we experience through the perceptions. And what's having the perceptions? What sees through the eyes, hears through the ears, as the poets say, but incorrectly. We don't see it accurately, but we do through it. The soul. So we see these many different usias through our senses with our souls. But he's saying, hey, if all of those particulars have a hyparxis of a single usia, so too do our souls, which means what? Although it appears in the world of senses, in the world of becoming, that there are many souls, so too there must be a hyparxis of them. Meaning what? It's the same soul. It appears to be many, like justice appears to be different to beauty, appears to be different to goodness, appears to be different from equalness, appears to be different from greatness, appears to be different from lessness, appears to be different from sameness, appears to be different from motion, appears to be different from likeness, appears to be different from so on, for all of the self terms. But it's the same usia at the top, at the hyparxis, where it comes from. So too, we recognize that, according to this, our souls have the same singular hyparxis. There is the same soul. So when Socrates said what we just read in the doctrine, that to dwell alone self by self might not be so lonely if it's the same soul. You've gone from the many to the one. What do you say, Owen?
Wow. 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 Wow.
According to this, let's keep reading. From the chat. I'm getting to the point in Platonism that I sound like a crazy person if I get more than the service level. Yeah, to the many. Let's go from the quote from Parmenides. He said, Zeno, Parmenides' student, the many are ignorant that without this dialectic through the beings, it happens to be impossible to hold on to truth. And Parmenides says, Socrates, your problem is you give heed to the opinions of human beings, Socrates. And you have to collect yourself together. So this collecting of ourselves together that we talk about with the soul appears also to that way that appears useless to the many, the dialectic. They call it empty talk. But if you don't do that, you won't get the truth. Which was why when Socrates says, hey, philosophers deserve death most than everyone, Simmias laughed at him and said, yeah, it's what everybody says. Philosophers are closest to death and deserve it more than anyone. Yeah, people say that because they say you're useless, so you're closest to death. You're not doing anything worthwhile doing philosophy all the time. And you deserve it because you're useless. Ha 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 ha. Dated somebody, got you into the right wing. Wow. And talking to myself, doing a kind of self-dialectic, the untaught thing you do. You need to speak to yourself. Yeah. Yeah, speak to yourself. Treat yourself like a friend, as Socrates says. Like Demon Slayer. I'm about 10 eps into Demon Slayer. They upgrade and using breathwork and contemplation. And yes, I've seen that. There's also in Demon Slayer, he sees the thread. I've heard philosophers talk about this. They're saying that a butcher never has to sharpen his knife. Because if you can see the logos, if you can see the dialectic, if you can apply it to the people you talk to, you don't have to extend effort. Because you know the line that to take with them. Oh, they're a materialist. They're at level 7. So I should talk to them about level 6. Oh no, but 7 has a warp to level 3. I could talk to them about level 3. And if I'm familiar, because I've been repeating this doctrine, I would know how to use the dialectic. I don't have to fight with them. Don't have to put effort into slicing the meat because I can see the sinews. I can see the lines therefore I never have to sharpen my knife. That's that effortless flow state that you can have if you've mastered the logos and dialectic through this practice and repetition so that you've made it yours. You can see it. One Piece, how far am I? I got to the end of Luffy versus Big Mama and Kaido. I thought, well, okay, if that's the end of that drama, I'm going to give it some time to get to a full end of the next one. So when I binge, I won't get halfway and be like, oh, what happened? So I'm going to wait till the next arc is finished, I suppose. Or the next chunk is finished so I can have a full arc. Has there been one completed in One Piece after Big Mama and Kaido? I don't want to give away any spoilers. Shit, have I said too much already? The Wakanda arc. Ugh. Oh, you're okay. Sorry, you're only up to 686. Ooh, I hope I haven't. Have I spoiled anything? Have I said too much? I hope not. You might not even have met Kaido. Right. Yes. Using Beat Saber, you have acquired timing and can mimic drums. Right. Practice, repetition. Good, good, good. Just forget what I said. I didn't really spoil anything. There are some people. He fights them. He either wins or he loses. So, yeah, back to the text. Repeat this, okay? So, let's see if what he's saying fits. There's a certain hyparxis prior to the individual ideas, which has ousia. That's the same ousia. So prior to our birth, they do exist in another way. Right, so maybe he's saying could this logos even have been discussed? So either the hyparxis of our souls must be the same knowledge. For us to even have this conversation, we have to be two different souls that can recognize ideas like beauty and justice and goodness. Recognize that when we see it in a stick, it falls short. So recognize that there is a likeness but a deficiency in the physical world to even have this conversation. Meaning there are two different souls chatting that both have an experience of knowledge prior to birth that is the same as each other. So we have the same ideas to relate to through the logos, which seems to imply that it's the same experience. And if it's the same experienced as phronesis, then it seems to be likely, and by the way, earlier we said it's experienced through contemplation, where you are not seeing it through your physical senses, you are seeing it by being joined with it. So if we can have this conversation, we must have both been joined to the same thing, meaning we must have been the same thing, meaning we have a hyparxis of our souls for us to even be able to have this conversation. There must be a singular soul that before our birth existed, that was having that singular experience of knowledge, phronesis. Of knowledge, allowing it to have this virtue of phronesis. Accordingly then, it has to be in this way. And there is an equal necessity, again, the word necessity. So there's a necessity for this to exist. So for our third question, that we've been carrying today, what should make us change our mind? Necessity. It's a necessity for them to exist, and also for our souls to exist before our birth, and a necessity for there to be a hyparxis of all of the beings, a single ousia. And if we experience truth and knowledge by uniting with it, then we become the same as it. Meaning there is a hyparxis also for our souls, necessarily so for us to have the same thing to which we're referring, the same thing that we're recalling at various levels of clarity. And the way we can say that we must change our mind to accept this, even though it doesn't feel true, even though we're not used to experiencing it yet. We have to keep repeating this. We're not used to talking this way. We have to keep repeating it. We're not used to experiencing it. When we do experience it, we have to keep collecting ourselves both now and in the future, get used to experiencing it. So what we're familiar with, both in logos and experience, is going to be different to this. Necessarily, because he's just said we forget it at birth. And then we go through however many years you are old, learning the opposite. Depending on what part of history you're at, you might not be so opposite. We happen to be at the level of history where we don't have this logos. So what we're learning is going to be against it. Because our next evolution or next stage of humanity would have to be awakening philosophy, awakening the logos. But we're not there yet in our culture. So necessarily, however old you are, you've had language and states of mind that amplify, solidify, protect and nurture, which is a good thing, but have been protecting and nurturing a logos and a state of mind that's different to this. So this reasoning is going to be unfamiliar, not used to it, and it's going to be an experience, a hyparxis of a single soul and out of the body, and what you experienced before you're born is going to be pretty unfamiliar. But you should still change your mind based on truth. That's courage. To go against what your feelings and desires and what you're used to is saying, to follow the logos. That's what we said makes the virtues, having the logos directed towards being. Any of the virtues that don't have the logos and don't have the logos directed towards being become vices. You become a worse kind of a person. You become a bigger jerk or tyrant or mass murderer if you gain power pursuing that ignorance. That's not a slight, that's just the truth. That's the truth of the human condition, according to the logos that Socrates is sharing with us, and we can share in too, which is wonderful, which should make us wonder.
Wow.
Makes Owen Wilson say,
Wow. 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 Wow.
So our third question is, given that we've had practice in the opposite of this, going from asleep to awake, or the negative reflection of this, a certainty that the soul doesn't exist, the logos is going to be different than what we're used to in our understanding and our states of mind, but there has to be something that we should use to change our mind on. That's our third question. What is our paradigm or metric or standard against which we should change our mind, even if it's not familiar? And the word he's using here is necessity. There is a necessity based on the logos that we're unfolding. There is a necessity for them to exist and for our souls to exist before we were born. And that they necessarily must have to have a hyparxis in a similar way that the Idea selves, the Usias, have the same primary Usia. And if we know that and we can talk about it, then we must also have contemplated it or unified with it. Why? Because you don't experience it through your senses, because you don't have the senses out of the body before you're born. So it has to be through sameness. So in the physical world, two pens are the same if they occupy the same space at the same time. But without space and time in the realm prior to the realm of becoming, what makes you the same as it? Likeness, sameness, the qualities. Meaning we share the same hyparxis. There is a single soul, ultimately. And that reasoning is not going to feel familiar, but necessity is what he's saying should change our mind. There is an equal necessity for them to exist and also for our souls to exist before we were born. And if this is not the case with them, then neither is it the case with those who follow. Non-contradiction, absolutely. So that you take the opposite. If it wasn't the case, this contradiction would follow. It wouldn't follow for this or them. Simmias says, the same necessity appears to me to be so absolutely. Again, using necessity to change his mind. And the Logos indeed takes refuge in beauty. So necessity, number one. Logos, number two. Beauty. He's using beauty as a standard. Not only is the Logos necessarily has to be that way, and like in the chat, a contradiction would follow if the opposite, but there's a beauty in the same way that our soul and the ousia of which you speak both exist before we were born. So there's a beauty. He's saying, hey, there's a sameness. In the same way that our soul and the ousia existed together, so too, there's a sort of beauty in the symmetry or the sameness of the soul and ousia. So too, does the Logos have a beauty? For me, at least, there is nothing so clear as this, that all natures such as these most especially do exist, such as the beautiful and the good and all those which we just spoke of now. And it appears to me to be sufficiently demonstrated. What did he say? Sufficiently. What else did he say? Demonstrated. What's the dialectic? Definition, demonstration. So he took this argument, which might be the division stage, by the way, and said, you've demonstrated it well. You've defined the soul and you've demonstrated. What do we have to do in philosophy? Understanding and experience. Definition, demonstration. And what have we been saying is our use? Do we use to judge? Well, we talked about the dialectic in action. Person one, self to self, definition. And this is the example. We need dialectic in our schools, in our world, in our schools, and everywhere. That's my premise. That's my hypothesis in this example. Definition. Person two has to judge whether that was sufficient or not. Do I already have a Logos that's the same that I can recall just from you having said this definition? Person one, if it's not sufficient, he'll say, I don't get it. Then person one has to give a demonstration of that definition, DD. Because it's needed to both solve problems and reach our highest, most meaningful, most good goals, both individually and collectively as a human race. That's a demonstration, a brief demonstration of the argument to show what we had just defined. Then person two has to say whether that was sufficient or not, all the way through. Sufficient. Was it sufficient to change your mind or spark your insight? If not, the person one has to give other to other, division. Okay, break it down, divide it up into its arguments. We talked about you can either take the positive or the negative. The positive, you have to say, well, if we did that, we would be together, we would be harmonious, we would unite as selves because we're all the same. And we saw in our argument, we are literally of the same soul. Through understanding and knowledge leading us to that via the dialectic, benefiting all and the whole. That would be what would result. That would be a division. Person two has to look at that and see whether it was necessarily so and beautiful in some way. So necessarily seems to refer to the Logos. Beauty seems to refer to the experience. There's our definition and demonstration. There's our A and B of philosophy. There's our dianoia and nous. There's our Logos and experience. And the word to refer to it sufficiently is sufficient. Logos is necessary. And if you're not just a computer, you're also a human. You are a human. Therefore, it's not just a necessity in the Logos and understanding. There is a beauty. What's beauty? We just saw it's a recognition or a recollection of something true that you experienced prior to birth is self-beauty, and you recognize something in that, which is beauty is how it's experienced. Necessity is how it's understood. So there's something in the experience of the reasoning of the dialectic that you relate to as beautiful, meaning you recall it or you remember it at some level. And what are you remembering? Truth. Therefore, there's a truth in that if you recognize some higher, more profound beauty in it, and also a necessity in the logos, both of which is needed for it to be sufficient for you as a dialectic, as the second person who is supposed to be benefited by the logos. So it's sufficient, it is necessary, it's beautiful in what followed in that division stage, if the definition is. Or if the person needed that, you could actually say, oh, by the way, that demonstration wasn't enough. Let me take the opposite. The B side, what if it didn't exist? Okay, if it didn't exist, there would be no understanding of how to change our minds if we weren't teaching dialectic in school and in everywhere, every day. Especially for our lawmakers. They would not change their mind. They would get stuck in their false opinions and prejudices and act like vice. They would become tyrants, whether they like it or not, as what follows necessarily from what happens if they don't learn the dialectic and the logos. And they would have no ability to explain why contradiction or hypocrisy matters and is the definition of corruption. So when the lawmakers say, I don't care if I contradict myself, and say, hey, yeah, I care about the people, but I'm going to exploit you and only give tax breaks to the rich, or just give fake tax breaks to give a little pennies to the poor and give millions to the rich. That sounds corrupt. What do you mean? Who cares? I can contradict myself. I can say I care about you, then act in this way. One law for thee, one law for me. Another law for me. But if we understand the necessity of contradiction, okay, let's keep going. It's the definition of corruption in reasoning and truth and understanding, and demonstrates it as irrational and harmful. Because why? Because if you contradict yourself, you're doing the opposite of necessary. And if it irks us, if it feels gross, it might be because it's the opposite of the beauty. There's no beauty and there's no necessity. You're self-contradicting and you're being hypocritical, which means that what you're doing, what you're defining, is the opposite of the truth. Why? Because either you take, if your hypothesis is beauty, necessity, sufficiency. If it isn't, the opposite follows, which proves that this version is wrong. Therefore, what is must be true. So if the hypothesis here is we should be teaching dialectic in schools, well, prove it. Well, we talked about what if we did, but we could also say, hey, if we didn't have it, these things would follow. And then we have to look at that and say, it's sufficiently contradictory or absurd if it didn't exist, if we weren't doing our hypothesis, if we didn't do what we defined, if we don't teach dialectic in schools and everywhere. All right? So that's what follows if we don't have it. And then the person one has to jump in and do other back to self, or take a key argument or idea or conclusion from that division stage, apply it back to the definition to conclude. That's the last stage. Apply it back. Other, this is other to other, and then other back to self, allowing you to conclude about whether or not your hypothesis is likely. That's important too. It's not truth yet until you experience it. Understanding and reasoning is what's most likely that would lead to truth. So that was our dialectic on the dialectic, a little bit of fun that we did the other day. So back here, we're back in the text where Simius is saying, hey, I follow your logos and there is a necessity. And the logos is also beautiful. In the same way our soul and the ousia is beautiful. and they both exist before we were born, both ousia and the soul. Therefore, conclusion. So he's taken from that other to other something that shows the necessity and beautiful and sufficiency. Where's the word sufficient? Do we see sufficiency in here yet? Let's keep reading. Maybe we'll find it. For me, at least, there is nothing so clear as this. All natures such as these most especially do exist, such as the beautiful and the good and all those which we spoke of just now. And therefore it appears to me to be, here we go, sufficiently demonstrated. There's a nice conclusion. We've wrapped it up. So our third question, what should change our mind? Going through the logos, through the dialectic format, definition, demonstration, division, and then unify that division into a conclusion based on what? Necessity in the logos and a feeling or recognition of beauty in our state of mind. Why? Because we have the logos to think, but also we are recalling that which we experienced prior to our birth. That is truth, and that is experienced as beauty. The same way you see a beautiful person, you recognize that's beauty. Why? You must have known it beforehand. Same thing with self-equal, same thing with self-good, and we just saw the logos to show it, because you don't see it in the particulars. You recognize it from the particulars. And Socrates said, by the way, not only that, you only recognize it through the particulars. That's how you get reminded. So that's the purpose of all physical things, is to remind you of the truth. All physical things have a purpose to remind you of the truth, and they have a desire to reach it themselves. Everything seeks a self-goal, and everything you perceive has a purpose to point you home, point you back to the being that you once knew before you were born. Therefore, your soul is eternal, is immortal, existed prior to your birth, as in your physical body, and new knowledge. And also from that knowledge and unification with knowledge itself and truth, and all of the ousias, the single self ousia gave you something called phronesis, which is still a bit of a mystery. So it's still a question, but we're getting closer. We're sniffing out that phronesis, because we go from a lover of learning to a lover of wisdom to a lover of phronesis by achieving the apprehension and the recognition and the direct experience and the logos of truth. That's the game we're in. That's what we're doing. Everything positive follows from it. Everything else happens as a shadow of it. Simple, so simple, but so wonderful and beautiful. There's a certain necessity in bringing it all together and applying it to ourselves in our world. Not just for these things, not just for the same ousias, not just for understanding what's necessary for the immortality of our soul, not just what is necessary and beautiful for showing that the ousia must exist, and beauty and good and all those must exist, but the dialectic. There is a beauty in outlining the necessity for learning the dialectic in our world, in our lives, in our schools, in everything. Because it's what we need to A, understand and remove our problems, and B, understand and experience truth. And also reach phronesis. Isn't that wonderful? What do you say, Owen?
Wow. 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 Wow.
And we don't have to believe that, or we don't have to take someone's opinion of what the soul is, or what the worth of a soul is, because we're not interested in opinions, we're interested in truth. And how do we access truth? Through the dialectic. What does the dialectic unfold? The logos, which is not truth, which is not opinions, but true understanding. Where does that come from? The same hyparxis of the single ousia. How do we recognize that? That is, we could not even have a discussion about our soul unless we recognized, or we shared in the logos, allowing us to recognize self-necessity, but also we had the direct experience of beauty itself so that we could recognize the beauty of the arguments, allowing us to evolve from personal opinions and ignorance and image thinking to be moved by colors and shapes, to recognize that the colors and shapes have a purpose to direct us towards the true beings. But the difficulty is you have to sacrifice the feeling that you know shit. You have to recognize that you're ignorant, because the allegiance to your ignorance is the shadow of knowing and the cause of our vice. And that can be hard to do because a lot of people get off on acting knowing. A lot of people like to put down the logos, anti-logos. They were given a pat on the head by their tribe. Oh, you shut down that person who questioned our family's way of being. We're all jerks and you're a jerk too. But if you shut down the person who said, hey, why not be a jerk and open your mind to understanding truth? Good follower, good soldier of the faith. That's the human condition. It's not personal, but it's there. You can either be a slave to it, or you can use your own understanding and experience to recognize it, understand it, purify yourself from it, and become a better person. And if you can share it with the world, you can make the world a better place. It's not personal, but it does exist. It's the shadow of the dialectic. The image of knowing is certainty. The image of the self-logos is shutting down conversation, making it stupid and absurd, taking it to its lowest common denominator, devolving into personal attacks. What's the appeal? The image of knowing is beauty. The experience of knowing is beauty. The experience and the appeal of our pathologos is certainty. Feeling like you're better than someone else because you attacked them, you made them feel bad, or you destroyed something they love. Oh, you love the logos? I'm going to shit on it. Ha 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 ha. Why? Because without the logos, there's no ladder of development. Let's go back to our notes. If what we're saying is true, that there is a ladder of development, that means that there's a hierarchy. And if up here is knowing, then this level of just the physical world of becoming, they still seek it, but they're blocked. So how can you appear knowing without actually having knowledge? How can you relate to others as a knower would? How would a knower relate to others? He would help, he would encourage, he would support, he would reason, he would engage in questions and answers to bring someone up. Every good person does that. Everyone who's good does that. Everyone. But if you don't have the dialectic, how can you ask questions and judge answers? If you don't have the paradigm, how can you have that to which you're moving? So what do you do when you're down here, but you want to be here, but you're not willing to accept there is such a thing as truth and logos? What's the shadow of being a good person who can reason well? Turn on any alpha male podcast. They'll tell you. Attacking people. The opposite or the reflection of it. You're still talking with them, so it's not the opposite, but you are making them feel bad. You are silencing the logos. You are attacking people. You win by making someone lose. The world of becoming is a back and forth movement of left and right, winning and losing. The bear eats someone, or the bear doesn't eat someone. The human, that's the world of becoming. The realm of being is a single hyparxis, as Socrates just said. All of the things that we recognize through the physical senses, beauty, justice, goodness, equality, they're all of the same single ousia. So too, all of our souls are of the same single soul. That's why someone who has actual knowing should be, as we saw in the text, able to give a logos of it through the dialectic, which means they can bring everyone up. But that requires learning. It requires a purification from our ignorance and a perfection through our learning. It requires repetition. It requires practice. It requires the virtues. What's easier? To be a jerk. Get into a position of authority, or just come in here and anti-logos over everybody. Destroy the logos. Why? Because there is no knowledge. There is no logos. There is no, that's our world at the moment. We have to awaken to the level of logos and knowing and dialectic so we can bring everyone up. Otherwise, we will hurt each other and fight each other and conflict with each other. And then, like that saying, never play chess with a pigeon. He'll knock over all the pieces, shit on the board, and strut around like he won. That's the path of logos. Attacking people. Debate. Being, oh, look how funny, I'm being a troll. What's being a troll? The anti-logos. Why? How else can I feel like a knower if I'm not hurting people? Why? Because I learned that hurting people is part of teaching them a lesson. Why? Well, if I want to oppress someone, I have to act violently towards them. But humans don't accept violence because we seek truth and knowledge and union. But if you say, oh, no, I'm actually teaching them, so in the end they'll get there, but the only way they can learn their lesson is if I inflict suffering on them, that's a bullshit lie, because it's anti-logos, it's in the physical body, so it can't be learning. But if you can trick people into accepting that you teach them a lesson and you therefore make them better by making them worse, by harming them, then you get people to accept violence and people to become sadists. If you accept violence, you can accept oppression and tyranny. Where it's okay, like right now, it's okay to do genocide on the Palestinians because we're helping them. We're teaching them a lesson of why it's not good to be oppressed, or why it's not good to be their race or their religion or whatever the hell. We're solving them from Hamas. It's a bullshit lie. But we can understand it with the dialectic. It's the image, the reflection in the lesser realm of what it means to be knowing in the realm of becoming, if you don't have the logos and you don't have the dialectic. Why is that important to say? Well, we just saw how beautiful and rational and necessary and sufficient it was, this whole argument that we went through that concluded in saying we are all one soul, just as all physical things are one, in that they are the same, in that they point to the realm of being, and they serve a purpose to help us remember being, which helps us to remember that our soul is immortal and eternal and wants new knowledge. So all physical things seek that, so we can understand all physical things, all people and even sticks. They all seek self-equal and self-beauty and self-justice and all of the self-ousias. They all seek that, and they all have a single purpose in the realm of being, in the realm of the physical world. Every physical thing has the same purpose, seeks self-ousia, and has the same purpose, has the same influence to help us remember, says Socrates in this argument, in this dialectic. And everything, and likewise, everything in the realm of being is the same, because they, whether it's self-justice or self-beauty or self-excellence, they all have the same self-ousia. So there's a sameness and unity of nature and of desire and purpose in the physical world. There's a sameness and unity of nature and hyparxis in the realm of being that applies to all beings, and that applies to all souls, because there's a unity and hyparxis of a single soul. So while all things in the physical world are the same in that they all desire and help us to remember being, so too there is a sameness in all souls, because we are of the same soul, and we seek to return to that unity of soul. That's a beautiful thing to say. Has a logical necessity to it. It's sufficient in that argument. But also the negative, the trolls, the anti-logos has to be acknowledged true. Why? Because that is the harm, the contradiction, the anti-logos, the destruction of the very thing that helps us to recognize truth and unity and cooperation and benefit and goodness. That shadow actively describes as virtuous the destruction of the logos, the destruction of the dialectic. Look how smug someone is when they, I just derailed the argument by insulting someone. Look how clever I am. It's gross, but it exists. Why? They think they are knowing because someone did it to them. Hurt people hurt people. That was done to them. When they had a genuine question about the nature of their self, they were shut down. And instead of asking the question, they had to believe that person was good because they were stuck with that parent or teacher or surrogate parent. And instead of having woken up to realize that, they continue to play that imitation game and continue the cycle of anti-logos, the very thing that would benefit them and us and all of humanity. Solve our problems, the logos and the dialectic. They think the greatest virtue is destroying it. That is the human problem. We have to acknowledge the shadow of the truth. The argument is beautiful and it's necessary and reminds us of the truth and leads us to the unity, but we have to acknowledge what follows if we don't do this. Hey, are we tired of endless cycles of oppression and exploitation and murder and suffering and genocide? Are we tired of it? How long do we have to go before we recognize there's a pattern playing out? And that pattern is the dialectic that is understandable and can be applied to solve our problems and reach our highest destiny. Another year, another day, another decade. How long do we have? So for all those, for that people who act like that, that's why. So that's the human problem. How do we not only share the truth, how do we overcome the fierce loyalty to vice? Shutting down the logos, being a troll or being a bigot or a tyrant, isn't not knowing. That's why the woman chose the bear. Women would rather run into a bear in the woods than a man. Not because they're not going to get eaten, it's because they enjoy vice. Vice is the absence of the truth in the places of virtue, the shadow of virtue. That's what we have to overcome. How do we do it? Let's see. Let's try. Let's have a go. Worth doing? Even if humanity doesn't come on board and we end up killing each other and destroying our planet, you will benefit. We shouldn't allow that to happen. But here's the thing, we don't have to. This is new. This needs to be awakened. We have the text to do so. We have the people interested to do so. We have the internet to connect each other. And we have Socrates encouraging us to do so and repeat it, but also mythologize it. Make it into a poem. Make it into your art. Make it attractive. And have fun with it. Sound like fun? Interesting to hear that your soul is immortal and knew knowledge and phronesis before your birth? Did it convince you? Are you willing to hold on to the logos until you can verify it for yourself? Are the stakes high enough to try it? Would doing that be practicing the virtue of courage and preparing yourself for the initiation into the virtue that doesn't lose its power? The kind of learning you can take with you beyond this life? How does ultimate beauty sound? And what are the implications from realizing we're all of the same soul? We're all the same soul, on the same journey, at differing levels of returning to and recollecting the truth about self. And how do we do that? The dialectic. That's our game. I hope you had fun. I hope you found that interesting. I hope you found some stakes to stay in the game. And I hope to see you next time. Thank you for joining me.